I never imagined that a short-term teaching assignment could turn into one of the most frightening weeks of my life. In the spring of 2016, I was 27, fresh out of a string of adjunct positions that never paid more than rent, and I had just accepted a guest lecture offer at Jefferson State Community College in Birmingham, Alabama. Behavioral psychology had always been my passion, my escape from the instability of my 20s. Yet, beneath the excitement, I carried a quiet anxiety. I was moving back in with old habits and old friends, hoping to anchor myself in some sense of stability. Kyle Dawson had been my college roommate, my confidant during all-nighters and last-minute research projects. Now he was a hospital technician working long, stressful shifts at UAB Medical Center. His life had become a series of endless days, punctuated by brief nights that rarely allowed him time to breathe. When I arrived, we fell back into our old rhythm. A mixture of familiarity and nostalgia, the kind that feels comfortable but sometimes suffocating. Our ritual was simple, yet oddly therapeutic. After his late shifts, we'd drive down to the 24-hour 7-Eleven on 5th Avenue South, picking up snacks, coffee, or sometimes just wandering the aisles in silence. I pretended it was research, observation of human behavior, consumer habits, or the subtle rhythms of late-night store culture. But in truth, it was our escape from the monotony and tension of our respective lives. It was late Thursday night, around 12:45 a.m., when I first noticed something was off. Kyle had come home unusually agitated, tossing his keys onto the counter. "Some patient's family just lost it on me," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I need to clear my head." I nodded, and we decided on our usual walk to 7-Eleven. The store felt different the moment we walked in. Fluorescent lights flickered faintly above, and the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than normal. The clerk, a man in his 30s who always seemed half asleep, gave us a weak smile. We drifted through the aisles, the smell of cheap coffee, frozen dinners, and stale snacks mingling in the air. Kyle picked up an energy drink while I wandered toward the snack section. That's when I noticed them. Two men stood in the frozen food aisle, roughly 20 feet apart. At first, I assumed they were waiting for each other, but there was something unnatural in their stillness. They didn't move. They didn't blink. One was tall and wiry, wearing a gray hoodie. The other shorter, heavier, a baseball cap pulled low. Their eyes locked on each other in a silent contest. Kyle leaned closer and whispered, "You see that? What's their deal?" I shrugged, forcing a laugh. Probably just waiting for a friend. But the air grew heavier, as though the store itself was holding its breath. I felt it in my chest, a tightening, a warning that something was off. The smaller man twitched suddenly, like a predator about to strike, and then everything erupted. The first shot cracked the silence. It echoed through the store, bouncing off the tile floor and metal shelves. My heart slammed against my ribs as Kyle grabbed my arm and yanked me behind a stack of laundry baskets in the household aisle. Glass shattered, cans toppled. The clerk screamed. Chaos consumed every corner. "Stay down!" Kyle hissed, pressing against me. My ears rang, and for a terrifying moment I froze, convinced the gunfire would find me even under the flimsy cover of baskets. The smell of spilled detergent mixed with the faint tang of blood, making my stomach lurch. I realized then that our regular late-night escape, our mundane ritual, had turned into a nightmare. Footsteps pounded past our aisle, heavy, erratic, and then the metallic clatter of the door opening as someone fled into the night. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. For several minutes, neither of us breathed. When the sirens finally pierced the night, I felt numb relief. Police arrived in waves, flashlights slicing through the shadows. We were escorted outside, hands shaking, while inside officers examined the store. They found shell casings and streaks of blood, but no bodies. No suspects. Just the eerie residue of violence. I tried to convince myself it was random. "Wrong place, wrong time," Kyle muttered, brushing past it. But I couldn't. Something primal in me had shifted. The world felt dangerous in ways I had only read about in papers and journals. The days following the shooting were surreal. I went to my lectures, tried to focus on students, but my mind kept replaying the shots, the way the men moved, the sound of glass breaking. Every time I passed a store, every parking lot, my body tensed. I caught myself checking corners, counting exits, imagining threats in every shadow. Kyle tried to distract me. "You can't live like this," he said one evening as we grabbed dinner. "It's not like you can control everything." But I knew better. That night at 7-Eleven had changed me. The sense of security I once took for granted had vanished. Ordinary spaces, the fluorescent-lit aisles, the hum of coolers, the chatter of night clerks, had become vessels of uncertainty. Sleep was difficult. I dreamt of the two men, their unblinking eyes, the echo of gunfire. I woke drenched in sweat, the metallic smell of blood lingering in my imagination. Even Kyle's calm presence couldn't ground me. Weeks passed. The 7-Eleven had boarded windows, a physical reminder of that night. I avoided it, walking past, staring at the quiet lot. The police never caught anyone. There was no closure. I found myself hyper-aware in every public space. Grocery stores, gas stations, college hallways, all potential stages for chaos. My lectures suffered. My confidence eroded. I was reminded daily of the fragility of safety, the randomness of danger. Kyle noticed the change. "You need a break," he said. "Take a weekend off. Go somewhere safe." I tried. I drove to nearby towns, wandered streets that didn't hold echoes of gunfire, but the anxiety followed. I realized that the threat wasn't just the men with guns. It was the knowledge that life could snap violently, unpredictably, anywhere. It took months for the tension to ease, but even now, late-night aisles make me tense. Every ordinary encounter carries the potential for something darker. The lesson became clear. Safety is never guaranteed, and vigilance is a quiet necessity, not paranoia. The 7-Eleven on 5th Avenue South remains, but I haven't stepped inside since that night. I carry the memory as both warning and motivation. Life is fragile, danger can appear in mundane places, and awareness is a skill as essential as any in behavioral psychology. I tell my students now, not just about theory, but about perception, environment, and unpredictability. And sometimes, I wonder how many people walk past these aisles, oblivious, unprepared, unaware of how quickly ordinary life can collapse into chaos. Life's fragility is often hidden in the mundane. Vigilance, awareness, and preparedness can protect us, but understanding that danger can arise anywhere, even in ordinary spaces, is the first step toward survival. I never thought a part-time job could make me feel so exposed, so utterly vulnerable. In the summer of 2019, I was 22, balancing my final semester at UT Dallas with 2 part-time jobs, struggling to pay rent and keep my life afloat. One of those jobs was at a small 7-Eleven on Greenville Avenue, a long strip of neon lights, late-night diners, and gas stations stretching through the heart of Dallas. My shift was 4 p.m. to 11 p.m., a schedule that left me exhausted, but gave me the flexibility I desperately needed. I liked working evenings in theory. The quiet hours gave me space to think, observe people, and sometimes even study. But the loneliness of the night shift was a different kind of pressure. The endless hum of the refrigerators, the buzzing fluorescent lights, and the occasional flicker of bulbs created an atmosphere that felt simultaneously sterile and claustrophobic. Most nights were harmless. College kids grabbing snacks, truckers fueling up, or a few late-night regulars buying beer and cigarettes. It was predictable, almost comforting. Maria was my coworker that summer, a 19-year-old who worked weekends. She was cheerful and upbeat, though I could see the same exhaustion behind her eyes that I felt behind mine. Sometimes, when it was quiet, we'd swap stories, college woes, funny customers, and minor misadventures in retail. Those moments made the night feel lighter, almost normal. But that night, everything changed. I was restocking the cold drinks, sliding cans into neat rows, when the walkie-talkie crackled in my hand. The sound was sharp, distorted, almost static, and immediately my pulse quickened. At first I assumed it was Maria or the manager checking in, but the voice was different, low, deliberate, and unsettling. "I'm watching you." I froze mid-motion, a soda can poised halfway on the shelf. My hand shook as I pressed the button. "Who is this? Wrong channel?" Silence. Then, after an unnerving pause, "Don't bother locking your car. I'll be waiting." My stomach twisted. I looked up at Maria, who had peeked around the corner with her usual hesitant curiosity. "Was that you messing with me?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "No. Did you hear it too?" Her pale nod confirmed my worst suspicion. Whoever this was, they weren't joking. We tried switching channels, checking the other walkie-talkies, and even tapping the emergency button, but the voice returned minutes later. Clearer this time. "Red shirt. You look nervous." I was wearing the standard red polo. My pulse shot up. Maria muttered, "I'm calling the manager." But there was no answer. The store was eerily quiet, as though someone, or something, had muted the world outside. We decided to finish the shift quickly, but my thoughts raced. The voice knew me, knew my routine. Closing time arrived far too quickly. Maria's ride came to pick her up, leaving me to face the parking lot alone. My car was parked in the far corner, half hidden under a broken street lamp. Every shadow felt alive. My hands tightened around the keys as I walked toward the car, glancing over my shoulder. Then I saw it. A dark sedan, tinted windows, idling near the edge of the lot. Its headlights were off, but a faint glow inside revealed someone smoking. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I rushed to the car, unlocked it, and slid inside, slamming the door shut. Every instinct screamed at me to drive away, but the sedan began to follow. At first I rationalized, maybe coincidence, a car waiting for someone else. But as I navigated through the lot, it matched every turn, lingering behind me like a predator. I dialed 911, voice shaking, explaining the situation. The dispatcher's calm instructions barely registered. "Drive to a well-lit area. Don't go home. Stay on the line." I spotted a gas station across from a 24-hour diner, pulled in under a floodlight, and parked. The sedan slowed, hesitated, then melted into the darkness. When police arrived 15 minutes later, it was gone. No license plate, no occupants. Even after filing a report, the officers were skeptical. "People mess with store radios," one said. But I knew better. This wasn't interference or pranksters. Someone had been inside, observing me, tracing my movements, waiting for the perfect moment to unsettle me. The days afterward were surreal. My sleep fractured into anxiety-laden naps, my dreams filled with the dark sedan, the voice over the walkie-talkie. Every car in a parking lot made me flinch. Every flicker of fluorescent light in a store aisle made my hands tighten around the cart. I couldn't ignore the lessons it was teaching me. Trust was fragile, safety relative, and even the mundane, walking to your car, finishing a shift, could be laced with threat. Maria noticed my unease, attempting reassurance, but her words were hollow against the vivid replay of that night. I started checking the lot before shifts, running through emergency scenarios, visualizing exits, escape routes, and safe havens. What once had been a simple, routine job had become a high-stakes exercise in vigilance. Weeks passed, yet the paranoia clung to me. The 7-Eleven, once just a place of work, felt like a stage where unseen forces watched, judged, and tested my reactions. Any stray crackle on the walkie-talkie made me jump. I avoided empty aisles, avoided closing alone, and drove circuits before approaching my apartment. The psychological toll grew. My coursework suffered. My interactions were shorter, more guarded. Even friends commented on my sudden jumpiness. I understood now that trauma doesn't always need a physical wound. It could live in anticipation, in fear, in the very environment that once felt ordinary. Eventually, I quit. I could no longer tolerate the constant tension and the fear of the unseen. But the memory of that night never faded. Every night I walk past a convenience store, I glance at the shadows, the parking lot, wondering if someone is watching, waiting. The lesson I carry now is simple but profound. Safety is never guaranteed. Life can pivot on the smallest, seemingly insignificant moments. Awareness, preparation, and the ability to trust your instincts are vital. And sometimes, survival means knowing when to walk away, when to prioritize your peace over routine or obligation. Even in the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft clink of soda cans, I know that danger can exist quietly, unseen, just beyond the glow, and that knowledge shapes everything I do. Ordinary routines can hide extraordinary danger. Awareness and instinct are our first defenses. Sometimes survival means listening to that inner voice, trusting your perception, and knowing when to remove yourself from harm's way. I moved to Reno, Nevada, in early 2014, hoping a change of scenery could help me rebuild my life. I was 26, recently out of a messy breakup that left me questioning nearly everything. My job, my friendships, even my sense of safety. By day, I worked at a small, low-paying office, staring at spreadsheets and juggling phone calls that felt repetitive and meaningless. The nights, however, were another story entirely. They were long, quiet, and heavy, with a kind of loneliness that didn't let up. To distract myself, I developed a habit: late-night drives to find coffee, snacks, or just a place to feel human again. The 24-hour 7-Eleven on Keystone Avenue became my go-to. It was brightly lit, always open, and strangely comforting. Its fluorescent lights seemed to hold back the darkness of the city's quieter streets, and the low buzz of the refrigerators was a strange kind of white noise that made me feel less alone. I liked watching people there too. The regulars, the night shift truckers, college students returning from late practices, or solitary figures like me, each seemed to have their own quiet story. I convinced myself that these small excursions were harmless, a little slice of stability in an otherwise uncertain life. That Tuesday night, around 1:30 a.m., I drove in for milk and a few frozen burritos. The lot was mostly empty, save for a dented minivan slouching across two spaces. Inside, the store was dimly occupied. A sleepy cashier, me, and a lone woman who seemed almost out of place. She looked to be in her late 40s, wearing gray sweatpants and a faded sweatshirt. Her posture was stiff, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the refrigerated section. At first, I barely noticed her, but that all changed when I walked past. Her stare followed me. Not just a glance, an unyielding, intense gaze that made the skin on my neck prickle. I tried a polite half-smile. Nothing. She didn't speak, didn't move closer, didn't blink, just watched. I shook my head, pretending it was nothing, and moved to the snack aisle. Still there. Every time I glanced back, she was positioned to see me. Her cart, oddly squeaky, moved a few feet at a time, almost as if it were an extension of her stare. At the register, I forced a laugh with the cashier. "She's been in here for an hour, huh?" he muttered. I nodded, heart hammering. It felt like the air itself had grown heavier around her. By the time I exited into the parking lot, I thought it might be over. I unlocked my car and stepped inside. But then I heard it. A metal squeak, slow and deliberate. I turned, and there she was, card in hand, moving straight toward me. I froze, keys clutched like a lifeline. My pulse raced as I watched her push the empty cart with a deliberate, almost ritualistic rhythm. My car was parked awkwardly next to the minivan, giving her a straight path to my front bumper. I climbed in and slammed the doors shut, fumbling to lock them. "Jesus," I muttered under my breath. The sound of metal scraping concrete made me jump, each squeak of her cart feeling like a countdown. Suddenly, she rammed it into the car. Clang. The noise echoed in the silent lot. I yelped, gripping the wheel, trying to start the engine. Her eyes met mine through the windshield, anger coiled tight in her jaw, lips drawn back as though she expected me to react, to brake. I shoved the car into reverse, narrowly avoiding the minivan. She pulled back and slammed the cart into the hood again. The dents were small, but the sensation of violation was enormous. My body was vibrating with adrenaline. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip the wheel. I couldn't make sense of it. Why me? Why now? There was no warning, no confrontation, just this rage, aimed like a spotlight directly at me. I threw it into drive and sped off, glancing in the mirrors constantly. She didn't follow in a car, she stayed in the lot, cart in hand as if marking some invisible boundary she wouldn't let me cross. The drive home was a blur. My chest ached, my fingers tingled, and every shadow along the freeway seemed like her cart rolling after me. I called the police first thing the next morning, filing a report. The officer was sympathetic but vague. Could be mental health issues. Happens sometimes at 24-hour stores. I knew that, but it didn't make me feel any better. That was the terrifying part, the randomness of it, the idea that someone could latch their anger, their rage onto a stranger for no reason, and it could escalate into a physical threat. For weeks, I couldn't drive past 7-Eleven without scanning every cart, every corner, every shadow. My heart would spike at the squeak of wheels or the faint sound of movement behind me. Even the memory of her stare lingered, unsettling me more than the act itself. I found myself avoiding nighttime errands, rearranging my schedule to daylight hours, but the anxiety clung to me. I realized the fear wasn't just about the woman. It was about the knowledge that danger can appear in the most ordinary, mundane moments, and there's nothing predictable about it. I became hyper-aware in every parking lot, every store, every quiet street. My routines changed subtly, double-checking locks, scanning surroundings before leaving, driving past lots once or twice before pulling in. Friends noticed my jumpiness. I tried to laugh it off, but even casual jokes about creepy people set my teeth on edge. What disturbed me most was how quickly a familiar, comforting place became a source of terror. That 7-Eleven, once a haven in lonely nights, now symbolized unpredictability and vulnerability. I realized the mind carries trauma in ways the body doesn't immediately show. The dents in my car were minor, but the psychological marks were deep and lasting. Months later, the memory still clings. Every time I hear a cart squeak or see someone staring too long, my chest tightens. I no longer take empty parking lots or quiet nights for granted. The experience taught me something crucial. Vigilance and awareness are not paranoia, they're survival skills. I've shared this story with friends, coworkers, even strangers online, hoping it might remind someone to pay attention to their surroundings, to trust their instincts, and to act when something feels off. It also reminded me to acknowledge fear without letting it control me. The 7-Eleven on Keystone Avenue still operates, lights buzzing softly, doors sliding open to late-night patrons. I avoid it, but I carry the memory with me, a warning and a lesson. Danger often lurks in ordinary places, and we don't have to be reckless to encounter it. Sometimes, it chooses us, and the only control we have is how we respond. Ordinary, familiar places can hide unpredictable danger. Awareness, caution, and trusting your instincts are essential for safety, and even minor acts of vigilance can protect you from unseen threats. I moved to Portland, Oregon in the summer of 2017, fresh out of college and juggling odd jobs while saving for graduate school. At 24, I thought I had my life lined up, at least enough to feel like I was in control. But the truth was far messier. Rent, bills, and the pressure to not fall behind weighed heavily. Nights often became a blur of errands, study, and restless thoughts that made sleep nearly impossible. To keep myself sane, I started frequenting the 7-Eleven on SE Belmont Street. It wasn't glamorous. It had flickering neon signs, a cracked parking lot, and a perpetually sleepy clerk. But it was open late, predictable, and quiet. It became my stop for coffee, gum, and cheap snacks, a small ritual in a life otherwise cluttered with stress. That October evening, rain had been falling steadily, turning streets slick with reflections of neon and streetlights. I left my part-time job early, grabbing a jacket to ward off the chill. My car, an aging Honda Civic, groaned slightly as I navigated the empty streets toward Belmont. I parked under a flickering streetlight, grateful for even the weak illumination. Inside the store, the hum of fluorescent lights felt almost comforting. I nodded at the clerk, a young guy named Tim, who usually had his headphones in, scrolling his phone absent-mindedly. A man caught my attention. Tall, unkempt, beard long enough to hide half his face, moving slowly between aisles. He wasn't browsing. He didn't pick up anything. He just lingered, glancing around like he was waiting for something. I tried to ignore him, focusing on grabbing my bottled coffee and gum. I've always had a habit my mother drilled into me. Check the back seat before getting in the car. I leaned over, and my stomach dropped. Someone was sitting there. I froze in the rain-slicked parking lot, gripping my keys so tightly the metal cut into my palm. Through the fogged glass, I could just make out a head turning slightly. Eyes met mine briefly before ducking down, disappearing behind the seat. Panic hit like a hammer. My first instinct was to bolt back inside. I ran, dripping wet, the slick asphalt threatening to send me sliding. "Hey, you okay?" Tim's voice called from behind the counter. "There's someone in my car," I stammered, pointing toward the Civic. He rushed over, peering through the windows with me, but the back seat was empty. Nothing. The man had vanished. "You sure you didn't just imagine it?" Tim asked, brow furrowed. "No," I whispered, throat tight. "I saw him." We called 911 immediately. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes, rain bouncing off their jackets as they examined the car. They checked the back seat, the trunk, every corner, nothing. They swept the lot, questioned pedestrians, and even inspected the nearby alley, but the man was gone. I should have felt relieved, but the uncertainty was worse than any confrontation. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily he had disappeared, how calmly he had waited, and how much he knew about my movements before I even realized. The officer suggested the man might have slipped inside the store after I bolted out. That thought was horrifying. What if he was still there, hiding somewhere I couldn't see? Every shadow, every empty aisle suddenly felt like a trap. Shaking, I decided to drive home once the police had cleared me. Rain pummeled the windshield as I navigated the empty streets. I told myself it was over, that the worst had passed. But just a few blocks from the 7-Eleven, I spotted him. The same man, walking briskly along the shoulder of the road, hood pulled low. His eyes, cold, calculating, locked onto me for an instant before he sprinted toward the car. "Jesus!" I yelled, swerving into the opposite lane, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. My heart raced as I dialed 911, hands trembling. By the time the police arrived again, he was gone, swallowed by the dark, rain-slicked neighborhood. I pulled over, gasping for air, realizing how fragile my sense of safety was. That was the moment I understood that danger can appear anywhere, even in places we consider safe. For weeks afterward, I avoided that 7-Eleven. Even a mention of the store made my stomach knot. I started double-checking locks, scanning back seats multiple times, and driving in patterns that allowed me to monitor my surroundings. Every parking lot became a potential hiding place, every stranger a possible threat. Friends noticed the change. "You're paranoid," they said, but I knew better. The threat had been real. The man's calm, methodical behavior made it clear he had no intention of leaving me alone. It was a test of control, of patience. And even though he never attacked physically again, the psychological weight lingered. I realized the store itself wasn't the danger. It was the vulnerability that came with ordinary routines, the small habits that make life manageable but can also expose you when someone has ill intent. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. I returned to the 7-Eleven only during daylight hours, carrying a small flashlight in my car just in case. I never forgot that night, though, and I never stopped looking into the back seat before entering any vehicle. That experience taught me a critical lesson. Safety is fragile, and ordinary places can harbor unseen threats. It also reminded me that instincts are invaluable. They exist for a reason. Trust them, and don't hesitate to act when something feels wrong. Now, whenever I walk into a dim parking lot or step into a late-night convenience store, there's a part of me that scans every shadow, every corner. It's not paranoia, it's vigilance. And I've learned that sometimes surviving isn't about bravery. It's about awareness, caution, and the ability to act quickly before ordinary routines become dangerous encounters. Ordinary, familiar routines can mask unpredictable dangers. Trusting your instincts, maintaining vigilance, and being prepared can protect you from unseen threats, even in places that feel safe and routine. I was 22 in college credits, but 20 years of restless ambition, and interning at a small advertising agency in Tallahassee, Florida, during the summer of 2012. The office wasn't glamorous, mostly spreadsheets, coffee runs, and occasionally helping with design mock-ups, but I felt lucky to be learning on the job. My family lived 3 states away, and the city felt big, unfamiliar, and slightly lonely. My days were structured chaos, emails, drafts, brainstorming sessions, and a subtle pressure to prove myself to people who barely noticed me, except when mistakes were made. One tradition, however, broke the monotony and became something I looked forward to. Every Friday night, a few interns and junior staff would pile into a rented van and head to the 24-hour 7-Eleven on Appalachia Parkway, grabbing snacks and drinks before a weekend retreat or late-night strategy session. The ritual wasn't just about food, it was about camaraderie, jokes, and pretending we weren't exhausted from the week. Marcus Hall, 21, had quickly become my closest friend in the office. Smart, funny, endlessly curious. He had a way of making everyone laugh, even during the most stressful projects. On that Friday, he suggested switching seats for the van ride. I was usually in the very back, headphones in, tuning out the chatter. But Marcus wanted to nap back there. Without thinking, I agreed, moving forward 2 rows. A small choice, but one that would alter the course of my night. We pulled into the 7-Eleven lot around 11:45 p.m. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of asphalt warmed by the lingering heat of the day. Cicadas screamed in the trees nearby. Inside, the store was alive with late-night energy. College kids laughing over cheap beer, a clerk ringing up lottery tickets with a sigh, and the faint smell of burnt pizza rolls from the hot food case. Marcus grabbed a bag of chips, tossing one toward me as he joked, "Man, if I eat all this junk, you better be ready for the heart attack aftermath." I laughed, not noticing the subtle tension in the parking lot outside, the way headlights briefly reflected in the puddles left by earlier rain. We paid, piled back into the van, and I settled into my new seat, earbuds in, half listening to the chatter. The van crawled along the dark streets, laughter bouncing off the interior walls. Someone joked about a client's ridiculous pitch, another argued over soda flavors. I leaned against the window, closing my eyes. The rhythmic hum of the engine and soft chatter made the world feel distant, almost safe. Then came the screech, tires skidding, a violent jolt that threw my body forward into the back of the seat in front of me. Glass shattered, metal screeched, and the world spun. Instinct took over. I gripped the edge of the seat, bracing as the van flipped once, twice, my mind unable to process time as seconds stretched and contracted with terror. When the world finally stilled, the only sounds were groaning passengers and the hiss of punctured tires. I clawed my way out through a shattered window, knees scraping, chest heaving. I looked for Marcus. Panic set in. He wasn't in sight. And then I saw the SUV. Headlights barreling toward us, unstoppable, colliding with Marcus before swerving off. My scream tore through the night. He was thrown onto the pavement, lifeless, or close enough to it. The rest of the interns and staff were scrambling, some bleeding, some in shock, trying to call 911 while the rain mixed with sweat and tears. My mind refused to process the randomness, the sheer cruelty of the sequence. Marcus had asked for my seat. That simple request had saved me, yet doomed him. Blue and red lights flashed across the dark trees as police and paramedics arrived. Everything blurred, shouting, questions I couldn't answer. Who was driving the SUV? Did anyone get a license plate? I shook, repeating the same thought. He asked for my seat. He asked for my seat. It sounded absurd when said aloud, but the truth gnawed at me. My choice to accommodate a friend had changed everything. Days blurred together. Hospital visits, grief counseling, and conversations I wanted to avoid. The agency suspended all retreats, everyone aware that our ritual had become a tragedy. I wandered the streets in shock, replaying the crash endlessly, trying to understand why fate had favored me. Even small triggers, screeching tires, the distant hum of a van engine, or the sight of a 7-Eleven lot, made my chest tighten. I couldn't step into the familiar routine without reliving the panic, the helplessness, the impossibility of saving someone who mattered. Weeks turned into months. I returned to the 7-Eleven, but only during the day. The bright lights, the constant noise, the harmless chatter inside contrasted sharply with my memory of that night. I studied the pavement, the lines in the asphalt, the layout of the lot as if searching for invisible hazards. The crash left something more than physical scars. It left an emotional weight I couldn't discard. Survivor's guilt settled over me like a shadow, persistent and suffocating. I questioned every decision, every small choice I made, aware of how fragile life could be. I realized that the danger hadn't come from a deliberate attack, but from the randomness of circumstances, from the thin thread that separates life from death. Marcus's laughter, the snack run, the casual seat swap, all were ordinary moments that carried extraordinary consequences. Over time, I rebuilt my routine, though I never fully recovered the naive comfort of the past. Every parking lot scan, every glance before entering a van or car was informed by that night. I learned the value of attentiveness, of respecting small decisions, and acknowledging the unpredictable nature of life. The 7-Eleven on Appalachia Parkway remains in my mind as more than a convenience store. It is a marker of fate, choice, and the fragile balance between survival and loss. Marcus's absence is a constant echo, a reminder that life can pivot in a single moment. I've shared this story countless times, always concluding with the same thought. We cannot control everything, but we can honor life by being mindful, aware, and compassionate. Small acts of attention, listening to a friend, noticing the world around you, can have profound consequences. Life's fragility is ever present. Small decisions, kindness, and attentiveness can shape outcomes beyond our understanding. Survivor's guilt teaches us to value the present, honor those we lose, and recognize that even ordinary moments hold extraordinary weight. I was 27, back in Tucson, Arizona, after an abrupt exit from graduate school in New York. Life hadn't gone the way I planned. My savings were gone, my confidence fractured, and my parents were polite, but disappointed. Moving back home felt like defeat, but I needed something, anything to hold on to. The night I accepted the job at the 7-Eleven on Speedway Boulevard, I didn't care about the paycheck. I just wanted to escape the apartment, the memories, and the sense of stagnation. Night shifts weren't glamorous. The hum of the coolers, the constant flicker of fluorescent lights, and the automatic doors opening and closing created a strange rhythm. Most nights were quiet, truckers, insomniacs, a few late-night students grabbing energy drinks or snacks. I liked the isolation in some way. It gave me time to think, to feel small victories in stocking shelves or catching a price mistake before anyone noticed. On a Wednesday around 3:45 a.m., the desert air dry and still outside, I was rearranging a new shipment of chips when she walked in. A woman in her late 40s, dressed entirely in black. Her skirt hung stiffly, her hoodie faded and loose, and her shoes clomped heavily against the tiles. Her hair was tangled and her face pale like she hadn't slept or eaten in days. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement of my presence. She moved slowly toward the instant ramen as if guided by habit rather than intention. I tried my usual polite approach. "Evening? Need help finding anything?" She didn't respond, just picked up a single pack of ramen, shuffled to the counter, and paid with exact change. Then she left. Odd but not dangerous. Night shifts attract people with strange patterns. 10 minutes later, she returned. Same motionless walk, same ramen, same silence. I felt a chill creep along my spine. On the third and fourth trips, I attempted to engage again. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need water or something else?" Her head snapped up. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, and piercing all at once. She whispered, flatly, "You're a monster. You never accepted Jesus Christ." My stomach tightened. "Ma'am, I think you might need—" Before I could finish, she erupted into a shriek, tearing at her hoodie, screaming about men who had attacked her. Fists pounded the counter. I staggered back, heart hammering. "Calm down or I'll have to call the police." The words seemed to snap her out of a trance. Her eyes widened, and she bolted into the night. I tried to shake off the encounter, but the quiet hum of the store felt oppressive after she left. The aisles seemed longer, shadows deeper, and the occasional honk outside pierced the silence in a way that made my chest tighten. I told myself she was a troubled soul and that was the end of it. But the next night, around the same hour, she returned. This time she carried something metallic. My chest sank before I even recognized it. It was a small handgun, trembling in her hands. Her face was wild, lips quivering, eyes darting between the shelves, the ceiling, and me. She didn't speak at first. When she did, her voice barely rose above a hiss. "You're one of them. You're part of it." I ducked behind the counter, fumbling for the phone. 911, please. Woman with a gun. Tucson, Speedway Boulevard. My hands shook violently. She didn't raise the gun, but the intensity of her stare was enough. I kept low, watching as she shifted, restless, unpredictable. Then, almost as suddenly as she arrived, she bolted. I watched her sprint across the empty lot, disappearing into the desert night. Police arrived minutes later. I explained everything, my voice cracking. They searched but found no gun, no woman. One officer gave a sympathetic shrug. "Could have been mental illness, stress, or a prank, but we'll take your statement." I left that night shaken, unsettled. Even the lights of the 7-Eleven seemed sharper, harsher, highlighting every shadow, every dark corner outside. The next week was unbearable. My nerves were frayed. Every car that passed, every pedestrian that lingered in the lot, sent spikes of panic through my chest. I double-checked the locks on every door, kept my phone in hand at all times, and constantly glanced at the rearview mirror as I walked to my car. Coworkers noticed my jitteriness. "You okay?" one asked. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, just night shift nerves." But even I knew it wasn't just nerves. Something about her, the silence, the sudden rage, the gun, had left a mark. I started keeping a tally of her appearances. Every night, I imagined her presence, her slow, measured footsteps, her blank face, the glassy eyes that seemed to see beyond the world we inhabit. I wondered what had driven her to this. Grief? Mental illness? Something darker? The ambiguity made it worse. Fear thrives on the unknown. By the end of the week, I made a decision. I couldn't risk waiting for her next appearance. The store felt unsafe, oppressive. I handed in my notice quietly, without drama, and left. Walking out that night, the desert air never felt so relieving. The fluorescent hum of the store faded behind me. Even after quitting, memories lingered. I would see a woman in black in a grocery aisle and feel my chest tighten. I imagined her silently following someone, carrying her grief, her rage, maybe even that gun, moving from place to place. The thought was suffocating, but it also made me acutely aware of the fragility of our routines and safety. Years later, I still think about that 7-Eleven. The encounters were brief, but they shaped a permanent vigilance in me. I realized that some dangers aren't calculated. They're random, chaotic, and born from someone else's pain. I also learned a lesson in empathy. Fear and rage often stem from suffering, and while I survived physically, the emotional weight of what she carried, and what she unleashed in those moments was undeniable. I never saw her again, but her presence lingers in my memory like a warning. The world is unpredictable, and ordinary spaces can suddenly feel dangerous. We must pay attention, act with care, and respect the unseen struggles of others, because sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about awareness and caution. Danger can appear in ordinary spaces, often born from someone else's pain. Awareness, empathy, and caution are essential in navigating life's unpredictability. Survival depends not just on strength, but on presence of mind and understanding the hidden struggles around us. I had just turned 23, recently moved across Sacramento after a messy breakup, and was trying to keep myself together while finishing a part-time online course in graphic design. Life felt unsteady. Days blurred into nights of staring at my laptop, and nights blurred into long, quiet hours working at the 7-Eleven on Franklin Boulevard. It wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable, at least until that Tuesday night in late March of 2018. Night shifts were strangely meditative. The hum of the coolers, the faint scent of brewing coffee, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, they created a rhythm that made the emptiness tolerable. I had developed routines, stocking candy bars in neat rows, sweeping the linoleum, checking the coffee machine every 15 minutes. My coworkers were scarce, and most nights I was alone, except for the occasional trucker, student, or insomniac wandering through. Around and no. 2:15 a.m., the door chimed, cutting through the monotony. I glanced up from the counter, expecting a familiar face or the delivery driver. Instead, a man walked in. He was unlike anyone I'd seen before during these shifts. Tall, extremely thin, and unnaturally pale, with sunken eyes that seemed almost carved into his skull. His movements were stiff, deliberate, and almost mechanical, as if he were floating rather than walking. I tried to greet him casually, hoping to diffuse whatever tension his presence stirred. "Hey there, can I help you find something?" He didn't answer, not even a twitch. His lips moved slightly, like he was whispering words to himself, but no sound came out. He drifted toward the cold drinks and stood perfectly still, staring at nothing. The fluorescent light reflected off his pale face, casting sharp shadows under his eyes. My chest tightened, a warning I couldn't ignore. I stepped closer. "Sir, are you all right?" Finally, he moved, but only enough to set a single bottle of water on the counter. His hands trembled. Leaning forward, almost imperceptibly, he whispered in a voice so low I barely caught it. "You don't belong here, no one's safe." A chill surged through me. My instincts screamed at me to back away, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. He didn't respond. Instead, he lurched forward a fraction more, enough to make me stumble backward. The store felt impossibly quiet except for my own sharp breathing and the faint buzzing of the neon signs outside. I grabbed the phone. Someone call," I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm, trying to figure out if I should confront him or hide. Then, almost suddenly, he relaxed, as if he'd only been testing the boundaries. He paid for his bottle of water, mumbling incoherently, and slid out the door with the familiar chime. I tried to rationalize it: mental illness, drugs, sleep deprivation, but the intensity of his gaze, the absolute stillness of his movements, lingered like a dark echo. That night I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my apartment felt heavier, every creak more deliberate. By the middle of the week, the strange encounters escalated. I was stocking the shelves when I noticed him outside the lot, standing perfectly still, staring in. The reflection of his pale face in the glass made my pulse spike. I pretended to organize stock, keeping my back toward the window, hoping he wouldn't notice me noticing him. I called 911, but by the time the officers arrived, he was gone. No vehicle, no trace, nothing. The dispatcher asked routine questions. The officers jotted down notes, politely concerned but ultimately skeptical. The psychological toll was immediate. I jumped at every car that pulled into the lot. Every figure approaching the door made me flinch. The store, once a refuge, now felt like a trap where anything could happen at any moment. Co-workers noticed my jitteriness. "You all right?" one asked. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, just a little stressed." They didn't know, and I didn't want them to. Even during daylight hours, I replayed his face over and over in my mind. The hollow eyes, the stiff movements, the quiet, terrifying declaration that no one was safe. My imagination began filling in scenarios. What if he returned with something sharper, faster, more dangerous? I stayed hyper-aware of every aisle, every corner, every reflection. The nights that followed were unbearable. Each shift felt like walking into a trap. I found myself standing behind the counter more often, not to serve customers, but to observe. Every small movement outside the lot, every car idling for longer than a second, caused my heart to hammer. I even started carrying a small flashlight, pretending it was for checking shelves, but secretly for protection. The man never spoke again after that first night, but his presence haunted the lot. Sometimes I thought I saw him at the far edge, obscured by shadows, vanishing before I could get a clear look. The ambiguity of it, never knowing, never confirming, was far more terrifying than any confrontation could have been. Eventually, I realized I couldn't endure the mental strain any longer. I submitted my resignation quietly, explaining that personal matters required me to step away. Walking out that night, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering dread. I'd survived, but the encounter had reshaped my perception of safety and normalcy. Even after leaving, the memory of his pale, hollow face persisted. I would see shadows in store windows, reflections in car mirrors, and feel the same creeping dread that had taken over me those nights. It was a constant reminder that danger could lurk unnoticed, often carried silently by people whose motives remain inscrutable. Years later, I can walk past a 7-Eleven without entering, but the instinctual glance at the glass reflection never fades. That night taught me the fragility of perceived safety and the importance of awareness. People carry unseen burdens, some manifesting as violence, some as unpredictable behavior that can touch strangers in the most ordinary spaces. I've also learned empathy. That pale man, whatever his intentions, was a person in pain, fractured in ways I couldn't understand. While I survived physically, the encounter left an indelible mark on my psyche, a reminder that survival is as much about psychological readiness and vigilance as it is about escape. Even now, when the fluorescent hum cuts through a silent night, I can feel the echo of his words. No one's safe. Danger is often unpredictable and silent. Awareness, caution, and respect for others' unseen struggles are essential. Survival is not only about strength, but also about vigilance, perception, and understanding that ordinary spaces can conceal extraordinary threats. Some people collect memories like postcards, neat, colorful snapshots they can pull out when they want to remember where they've been. I think I collect moments I'd rather forget, not because I want to, but because they stick to me, stubborn as tar, and no matter how many good memories I pile on top, they always find their way back to the surface. This one started in late autumn of 2018, back when I was living in a small rental in Bakersfield, California. I'd moved there 2 years earlier, chasing the kind of fresh start you think you'll find when you pack up your whole life and drive across the state line with the radio up and the windows down. At the time, I was working in a little print shop, the kind that smells like toner and dust, where the biggest excitement of the week was a customer ordering wedding invitations with a typo and insisting it was our fault. I'd gotten into a habit of keeping my world small. Work, groceries, an occasional dinner with friends, then back home. Bakersfield wasn't the kind of place that begged you to explore. It was dusty, flat, with stretches of road that made you feel like you were driving through an unfinished painting. But that night, my best friend Callie was hosting a little get-together at her place on the west side of town. Nothing fancy, just wine, too many snacks, and the kind of easy laughter you only get with people who've known you long enough to remember your bad haircuts. I stayed longer than I planned. It was after midnight by the time I said my goodbyes, stepping out into the cool air that smelled faintly of rain that hadn't arrived yet. My car was one of only a few left parked along her street. I climbed in, turned the key, and started the familiar drive home. The road was quiet. Too quiet. Bakersfield after midnight has this strange emptiness, not the romantic kind you find in movies where a lone street lamp glows and a piano plays somewhere off-screen, but a hollow sort of silence. You notice every sound your car makes, the hum of the tires, the low rumble of the engine. Even the click of the turn signal feels like it's tapping into the dark. I was halfway through one of my playlists when I glanced down and saw my fuel gauge sitting dangerously close to E. My stomach sank. I had a bad habit of ignoring that little orange light, convincing myself I could always push it one more day. Not tonight. The only station I knew was still open was a 7-Eleven on Union Avenue, and I hadn't been there since I first moved to town. Back then it was in the middle of the day and the place was busy with people in line for coffee or lottery tickets. Now it was coming up on 1 in the morning. I signaled, merged toward the exit, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping in around the edges. When I pulled in, the lot looked almost abandoned. 2 vehicles were there, an old dented pickup at one of the pumps, and a dark sedan parked in the far corner with its headlights off. The 7-Eleven sign above flickered like it was struggling to stay awake, buzzing in that insect-like way fluorescent lights do. It's strange, the way you can feel the air in certain places. This air felt heavy, stale, like the quiet wasn't just quiet. It was waiting for something. I pulled up to a pump and got out, wrapping my arms a little tighter around myself against the cold. Somewhere in the distance, a truck rattled down the highway. The night smelled faintly of gasoline and that burnt coffee scent convenience stores always seem to have. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the far pump, shoulders hunched, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a torn denim jacket. Even from where I was, I could tell he'd been drinking, or something stronger. His stance swayed, just enough to make the whole scene feel unstable. He caught me looking. Slowly, he started walking toward me. "You got a cigarette?" His voice was low, raspy, like gravel in a tin can. "Sorry, don't smoke," I said, forcing my eyes to stay on the gas pump display, pretending to focus on the numbers. He didn't leave. He just stood there, staring like he was waiting for me to say more. The space between us wasn't large, but it felt like he was leaning into it. Then he muttered something under his breath. Too quiet to make out, but the tone was wrong. Not just muttering, arguing, and not with me. Suddenly he turned, slammed his fist into the side of his own gas pump. The metallic clang echoed across the empty lot. I felt the sound in my teeth. I kept my voice calm. "You okay?" No answer, just another mutter, faster now, like his words were tripping over each other. Then he walked toward the little strip of gravel landscaping near the store. I watched, heart thudding, as he crouched and picked up a rock. The first rock hit the ground near my feet. I froze. The second hit my car door with a dull, heavy thunk. "Hey, stop!" I shouted before I could think better of it. He didn't even look up. Another rock. This one smaller, bounced off the pump. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in the idling car in the corner. The windows were tinted too dark to see clearly, but the faint shift of a silhouette made my stomach twist. That was enough for me. I yanked the nozzle from my car, spilling a few drops of gas onto my shoes. The sharp smell hit me as I shoved it back onto the pump, heart hammering. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors with a quick slam of the button. He was walking toward me now, not rushing, just steady, like he had all the time in the world. In his hand, another rock. For a second, I thought he was going to throw it through my window. The image flashed in my mind so vividly that my muscles tensed, ready to duck. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, tilted his head and grinned, a wide, uneven grin that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't wait to see what came next. I put the car in drive and floored it. As I pulled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there watching me go. The sedan in the corner. Its headlights flicked on. I didn't stick around to find out if it was following me. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The streets were empty, but every shadow felt like it could hide something. I drove fast, taking turns I didn't need to, just to break the line of sight. Only when I was sure I'd lost them, if they were even following at all, did I grab my phone and call 911. My voice was shaky as I told the dispatcher what happened. An officer was already headed to the 7-Eleven. Apparently, there had been calls earlier about the same man. The next day, in daylight, I went back for coffee. The lot looked smaller somehow, the corners less threatening, but I still caught myself glancing toward that far spot where the sedan had been. The cashier told me the man had been hanging around for days, said with a shrug, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. Probably high on meth. But that doesn't explain the car, or the feeling that its occupant was watching. Some memories stick for a reason. Sometimes danger doesn't roar, it waits in silence. Trust your instincts even when nothing big has happened yet. It's better to leave and be wrong than to stay and find out you were right. I used to think the night shift was the safest kind of job for someone like me. Someone who didn't like crowds, didn't mind silence, and preferred a slower pace. You know, the kind of person who thrives on structure and control. That's why, when I was 26, working part-time at a 7-Eleven in Clearwater, Florida, I thought I'd found the perfect setup. A little extra pay for the overnight hours, long stretches of quiet where I could study for my criminal justice degree between customers, and a predictable routine. The store was on Gulf to Bay Boulevard, not exactly in the heart of downtown, but busy enough during the day with people heading to the beaches or rushing to work. At night, though, the world shrank. The traffic lights blinked in endless patterns for cars that never came. The air got thick with that wet Florida humidity, the kind that fogs up your glasses the second you step outside. That night in late February 2021 had started like any other. I came in just before 11 p.m., relieved the evening cashier, and went through my checklist. Restock the chips, wipe down the coffee station, fill the cooler with sodas and water. The customers trickled in. A rideshare driver grabbing an energy drink, a guy in paint-splattered jeans buying 2 scratch-offs, and one older woman who spent 5 minutes debating over gum flavors before settling on spearmint. By midnight, I was alone. The hum of the coolers became a kind of white noise, steady and hypnotic. The fluorescent lights gave everything that slightly washed-out look, and I was sitting behind the counter reading through case studies for one of my online classes. I didn't know then that within 2 hours I'd be holding my breath behind that same counter, phone in hand, whispering to a dispatcher while someone with a knife walked the aisles. But the first sign that something wasn't right wasn't the knife. It was the sound of the front door beeping when no one walked in. It was exactly 12:38 a.m. I remember because my eyes flicked to the clock above the register, right as I heard the soft, mechanical beep of the door sensor. The glass door creaked open a few inches, slow, like someone was pushing against it with hesitation. But no one stepped inside. The green light on the motion sensor blinked once, twice, then went solid. I frowned, pushing my chair back. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the empty store. No answer. I stepped out from behind the counter, shoes squeaking slightly on the clean tile, and scanned the parking lot through the front windows. The only vehicle in sight was a silver sedan parked by the far pump, empty. Or at least it looked empty from here. The mist in the air made the streetlights look like fuzzy orbs hanging over the asphalt. Probably the wind, I told myself. Or maybe the sensor was glitching again. I closed the door fully, felt the latch click, and went back to wiping the counter. The next 10 minutes passed in the same quiet rhythm. I poured myself a coffee even though I knew it would taste burnt, and returned to my notes. That's when I heard the thump. It came from the back of the building. Sharp, heavy, like someone had smacked the rear door with an open palm. I froze. The only deliveries we got at night were for newspapers, and that wasn't until 4 in the morning. I leaned down, switched on the small black and white monitor for the rear security camera, and felt my stomach drop. There he was, a man in a dark hoodie, head down so I couldn't see his face, standing perfectly still at the rear door. His hands were on the handle like he was testing it, and then I realized I'd seen him before. Around 11:15 p.m., just over an hour earlier, he'd come in for a bottle of water. Didn't say much, didn't smile, just stared a second too long when I handed him his change. And not at me exactly, at the stockroom door behind me. Now he was back there outside, like he'd been circling. I grabbed the store phone and punched in 911. 7-Eleven on Gulf to Bay, I whispered when the dispatcher answered. Back door trying to get in. I'm alone. There's a man at the she kept me talking, asking for a description, telling me to stay where I was. I rattled off everything I could remember, but before I could finish, the monitor flickered. One moment he was there, the next, empty. My heart started pounding in my ears. I turned my head just in time to hear the front door beep again, loud and clear. This time, it didn't creak open slowly. It slammed open, the bell jangling hard against the glass. He was inside. He moved fast, long strides, not looking at me at all, just heading for the back. "Hey, you can't be back there!" My voice cracked halfway through, and I hated the way it made me sound. No reaction. He was already halfway down the aisle, his dark hoodie swaying as he moved. I thought about the baseball bat we kept under the counter, but I didn't trust my hands to hold it steady, so I kept the phone to my ear, whispering to the dispatcher that he was inside now, moving toward the stockroom. The aisles went quiet after he disappeared into the back. I strained to hear anything over the hum of the refrigerators. Then, faintly, came the sound of muttering. Fast, jumbled, words tripping over each other. A metallic scrape followed, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. The red and blue lights from the responding units flashed through the windows before I even saw them pull in. Officers moved in quickly, voices sharp and commanding. I stayed behind the counter, my knees locked, watching them vanish into the back. They found him in the far corner of the stockroom, crouched low, gripping a long kitchen knife from one of the open boxes. He lunged once, but they took him down fast, pinning him and pulling the weapon away. When it was over, one of the officers came to the counter and told me he wasn't drunk. No drugs in his system either. "Clear as day," the officer said. That somehow made my skin crawl more. No chemical haze to blame, just intent. I closed early that night, locking the doors and sitting in my car with the engine running, hands still trembling. The moment that stuck with me wasn't the knife, or even the way he moved through the store like he owned the space. It was the first time the door beeped, when nothing was there. Because part of me wonders if, in that moment, he was there, just out of sight, already inside, waiting for the right time to come out. When you're alone, pay attention to every detail, even the ones that seem harmless. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just waits for you to dismiss the first warning sign. I've never been afraid of mornings. In fact, I've always liked them. The quiet before the world wakes up, the air still holding on to the last bit of night's chill. Back in November of 2019, mornings were my whole routine. My alarm would buzz at 4:45, and by 5:02 I'd be out the door, coffee in hand, earbuds in, heading toward my job at the 7-Eleven on the edge of Ashbourne, Oregon. I was 27 back then, with a life that was small but steady. Morning shift suited me. I liked knowing I'd be done before noon, free to go home, paint in my little apartment, or stretch out in bed with my cat Murphy, who seemed to love mornings as much as I did. The only hitch was getting there. My apartment complex sat on one side of town, the store on the other. There was a bus, but it didn't run early enough, and I wasn't about to spend half my paycheck on Ubers just for a 10-minute ride. So I cut through the woods. A thin patch, maybe a quarter-mile wide, connecting two quiet residential streets. In daylight, it was harmless. Neighborhood kids cut through it to get to school. But at 5 a.m. in late fall, it was another story. The trees stood close together, their bare branches clawing at the sky, and the path ahead always seemed darker than it should be. That morning, the air was so cold it stung the inside of my nose. The ground was soft from the rain the night before, leaves sticking to the bottoms of my sneakers. I had my playlist on low, just enough to keep me company without drowning out the sounds around me. I took a sip of my coffee, tasting the burnt bitterness, and reminded myself I'd make a better cup once I got to work. Halfway through the path, the stillness hit me. No rustle of wind, no distant hum of a car engine, just the crunch of my own footsteps. Then, without warning, the hair on the back of my neck rose. I glanced over my shoulder. The path behind me was empty, just shadows tangled between tree trunks. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a squirrel or a stray cat. I'd watched enough crime shows to know better than to let my imagination run wild. Still, I slowed my steps. That's when I heard it, the soft rhythm of footsteps matching mine. I stopped. The sound stopped. I turned fully around, my breath hanging in the air, but there was nothing there. A laugh slipped out of me, too sharp to sound genuine. "Get a grip, Karina," I muttered, and started walking again, a little faster. The sound returned, faint but deliberate. The light at the end of the path glowed like a beacon. I didn't run, but I walked hard enough to feel my pulse in my ears. When I finally stepped out into the open, the 7-Eleven's bright fluorescent lights flooded over me. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a single car, an old blue sedan parked way off to the side. The engine was off, the windows fogged. I didn't look twice. Not then. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and microwaved burritos wrapped around me like a blanket I wasn't sure I wanted. Dennis, the night cashier, was at the Slurpee machine wiping it down with the kind of focus you only had when you were trying to stay awake. "You're early," he said, glancing up with a tired grin. "Couldn't sleep," I lied. No need to tell him I'd just power walked my way out of the woods like someone was chasing me. I headed straight to the back to clock in. The staff room was small, a dented metal locker, a desk that doubled as a break table, and a narrow window facing the side lot. As I slid my bag into the locker, something caught my eye. Movement outside, just a shadow slipping between the trees where I'd come from. My hand hovered over the time clock. Could have been nothing. Trick of the light. But it didn't feel like nothing. I shook it off and got to work. For the next 30 minutes, I restocked the shelves, but I kept glancing toward the lot. The blue sedan hadn't moved. No door opening, no lights flashing, no exhaust puffing into the cold air. At 5:49, I took the trash out. The dumpster sat by the back fence right near the edge of the woods. My breath hung thick in the air as I shoved the bags in. That's when I heard it, a rustle in the brush just beyond the fence. "Hello?" I called out before I could stop myself. Silence. Then the faint crunch of leaves moving away from me. When I came back inside, Dennis was at the counter staring toward the parking lot. "You see someone come in?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, but that car's been sitting there for an hour. Engine's off. Just sitting there." By sunrise it was gone. No sound, no headlights, just gone. By the time my shift ended that day, the whole thing felt almost silly. The footsteps in the woods, the car in the lot, it all blurred into that weird morning fog my mind liked to make out of small events. I told myself it was coincidence. People park in strange places. Shadows move. Sounds carry differently in the cold. The blue sedan didn't come back for the rest of my shift. The streets were fully awake by the time I walked home. No need for shortcuts now. I stuck to the main road, traffic buzzing by, the bakery on the corner pumping out the smell of fresh bread. But the thing about unsettling moments is they have a way of creeping back in when you're still. That night, as I sat painting in my apartment, The memory of those matching footsteps kept nudging me. I thought about how they stopped when I stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. When my alarm went off the next morning, I stared at my shoes by the door, debating. I could take the long route, but it would mean getting up earlier, and the rational part of me insisted I was overreacting. So I cut through the woods again. The path was the same. Damp leaves, low light, air so cold it pinched my cheeks. I kept my music off this time, just listened. My steps echoed in the stillness. Halfway through, the prickle hit the back of my neck again, that invisible hand of awareness. I glanced behind me. Nothing. When I stepped into the open at the far end, I scanned the parking lot. Empty, no blue sedan. Inside, Dennis was stocking the fridge. "Mornin'," he said without looking up. "Mornin'." I moved to the back to clock in, checking the window again. Still nothing. The shift passed in its usual rhythm. Coffee refills, cigarette sales, the steady hum of the coolers. But as I was leaving, I caught sight of something odd out the front door. Across the street, just at the tree line, a man was standing perfectly still, facing the store. I couldn't make out his face from that distance, just the dark shape of him. I blinked and he turned, walking back into the trees. By the time I crossed the street, there was no sign of him. The third morning, I didn't even make it through the woods before something happened. I was maybe 50 feet in when I heard movement ahead. Not footsteps this time, more like someone shifting their weight on damp leaves. I froze. The sound froze too. I could see the faint light from the other side of the path, but every instinct in me screamed to turn around. Still, I took a slow step forward. Then another. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable click of a lighter, followed by the brief flare of a flame. Just ahead in the shadows, a face lit up for half a second. Male. Late 20s maybe. Unshaven. The light died as quickly as it appeared. I backed up without a word, then turned and walked fast the way I'd come. My chest was tight by the time I reached the street. I called an Uber right then, money be damned. The driver, an older guy with kind eyes, glanced at me in the rear view. "You saw a ghost. You okay? You look like just someone in the woods," I said, not wanting to sound paranoid. When I got to work, I checked the lot. No sedan, no man. That night, when I got home, there was something wedged into my apartment doorframe, a piece of paper folded in half. I unfolded it, and my stomach dropped. In shaky, slanted handwriting, it said, "You walk the same way every morning." There was no signature, no other mark. Just that sentence. I called the police. The officer who came out was polite but firm. He said, "Without a suspect or a witness, there's not much we can do." There's no explicit threat here. I stared at the paper on my kitchen counter after he left, Murphy winding between my legs. My shortcut through the woods wasn't just a bad idea anymore. It was a pattern someone had noticed, and patterns are dangerous. I didn't set my alarm the next morning. I'd already decided before going to bed. No more woods. No more letting convenience make my choices for me. I got up 20 minutes earlier, dressed in layers against the November chill, and stuck to the main road. The walk was different, brighter even in the dark. Streetlights lined the sidewalk and early commuters passed in bursts of headlights. I felt exposed in a good way, visible. If someone was watching, they couldn't hide. Still, my mind was on high alert. I kept scanning my surroundings, the gas station, the shuttered diner, the quiet bus stop. No one followed. No blue sedan. When I arrived, Dennis was just finishing his shift, in the sink. "You're early again," he said, tossing his rag new route. I told him, "The woods are off limits now." He chuckled. "About time. Always thought you were crazy for walking through there in the dark." By the end of the shift, I felt a kind of relief. The tension of the last few mornings had dulled to a low hum. The sedan hadn't reappeared. No strange figures at the tree line. Just another quiet morning in Ashbourne. But paranoia doesn't switch off. A week later, I was locking up after a midday shift when I spotted it again. The same blue sedan parked across the street. Engine off, windows up. I froze by the door, keys in hand. This time, though, I didn't wait. I stepped outside, pulled out my phone, and took a clear photo of the car, plate and all. My hands didn't shake. The engine started as I did it, and the car rolled away slowly, turning out of sight. I sent the photo to the local police department with a short message. This vehicle has been watching my workplace for several mornings. They responded the next day. The plate belonged to a man with a long record of trespassing and harassment charges. No active warrants, but enough history to put him on their radar. That didn't make me feel safer exactly, but it made me feel less invisible. I've kept the long route ever since, and maybe nothing more will happen. Maybe it was all just a strange, disconnected series of events that my brain tied together into something darker. But the note still sits in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, not as a fear trigger, as a reminder. Because here's the thing. Patterns work both ways. Yes, dangerous people notice them, but so can you. And you can break them before someone else decides what they mean. Never let your comfort zone make you predictable. If your gut says something's wrong, it doesn't matter if it's nothing in the eyes of the law. That instinct is there for a reason. And sometimes, listening to it is the difference between a close call and a story someone else tells for you. Some days don't just stay in your memory. They get stitched into you like a scar you don't notice until you brush against it. July 11th, 2006 is one of those for me. Summer that year felt endless, the kind where every morning started with the same question. What do you want to do today? We didn't have cell phones glued to our hands yet. We had bikes, heat waves, and the kind of stubborn boredom that sent us looking for something, anything, to turn the day into a story worth telling. That morning had already been a little electric. I'd woken up knowing exactly what I wanted. A Slurpee. Not just any Slurpee, but a free one. July 11th was 7-Eleven's annual gift to the world, and to an 11-year-old, free sugar on a stick hot day was about as close as you could get to Christmas in the middle of summer. My older sister Lila was 15, in that phase where hanging out with me was the social equivalent of carrying a bag of dog poop. But our parents trusted her to watch me when they were at work, which meant she got stuck with me more often than she liked. I begged her for a solid 15 minutes to come with me. She sat on the couch pretending not to hear me until finally she sighed, rolled her eyes and said, "Fine, but you're carrying my bag." We left the house at 2:15 in the afternoon. The air outside smelled like sun-warmed asphalt and cut grass. Cicadas screamed from the trees on Maple Street, and the sidewalk was cracked and buckled from years of heat. I kicked at the weeds, pushing through while Lila walked ahead, swinging her tote bag against her hip. We passed Mrs. Gordon's garden, more weeds than flowers, but she still watered it every morning, and crossed the street where the pavement shimmered like it was melting. I was talking nonstop, and Lila was doing her best to look like she wasn't listening, but I caught her smirking when I told her my plan for adding a secret second floor to our treehouse with the neighborhood kids. We argued over Slurpee flavors the rest of the way. I was cherry all the way. She was Coke. "Cherry's fake," she said. "Coke tastes like something real." I told her Coke was just brown ice. She called me a child. I reminded her she still slept with the nightlight on. When we reached the corner of 8th and Willow, the sliding doors to the 7-Eleven whooshed open and that blast of cold air hit us. It was like walking into another world. The hum of refrigerators, the smell of sugary drinks and microwaved burritos, the floor a little sticky from melted ice. A few kids our age were already in there, cups in hand, their lips stained red or blue. Lila didn't hesitate, heading straight for the Coke machine. I veered toward the cherry, but something stopped me. In the snack aisle, a woman was crouched down holding the leash of a little white dog. The dog had a bright blue bandana, its fur freshly brushed, its eyes black and shiny. She looked up at me with a smile that felt personal, like we already knew each other. "Hey," she said, her voice low and warm. "A minute? I need to run to the restroom. Could you do me a favor?" Can you watch him for just—" I nodded without thinking. At 11, my default was to say yes. The woman's smile widened. "So he doesn't bark at people?" "Great," she said. "Come with me. I'll show you where to stand." I glanced toward Lila, who was busy filling her cup, and then back at the woman. I didn't want to seem rude. Besides, she had a dog. People with dogs were good people, right? We stepped through the automatic doors, the air immediately thick and hot again. The pavement radiated heat through my sneakers. She led me toward the side of the building, her steps quick and purposeful. As we rounded the corner, a man appeared from behind a stack of soda crates. He was tall, his cap pulled low, his skin tanned and rough. Without a word, his hand shot out and clamped around my arm. The grip wasn't casual. It was hard, bruising, like he was trying to pull me somewhere before I could think. My brain went white for a second, and then instinct kicked in. "Hey!" My voice cracked, sounding smaller than I wanted it to. The woman's smile was gone. Her face was flat now, her eyes cutting to the man like this was a handoff they'd rehearsed. And then I heard Lila. "What the hell are you doing?" She came around the corner so fast she nearly slipped, Slurpee in one hand, her free hand grabbing my arm and yanking me back so hard my shoulder ached. The man cursed, stepping toward us, but before he could close the gap, a deep voice called out from the parking lot. "Hey, back off!" A guy by the gas pumps was striding toward us, his hands clenched into fists. The man let go. Without a word, he turned and ran toward the side street. The woman was right behind him. They disappeared into an old white van, the engine coughing to life before it roared away, tires screeching against the asphalt. Lila still had her hand on me, shaking with adrenaline. Her eyes were wide and glassy. "You ever follow someone outside like that again?" she said, her voice breaking. "Don't inside." The clerk had already called the cops. My heart was still hammering when the officers arrived. They listened, took notes, and told us this wasn't the first time the pair had tried it. 3 other towns, same method, same van. Never caught. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept feeling the man's hand on my arm, the heat of the parking lot, and the cold snap of the moment when the woman's smile vanished. The next morning, the world looked the same, but I didn't feel the same in it. I sat at the kitchen table watching the light pour through the blinds in skinny strips across the linoleum. Lila sat across from me, eating a bowl of cereal like nothing had happened, but every now and then I'd catch her glancing at me, quick and sharp like she was checking I was still there. Mom had come home from work late the night before, after the police had already left. Lila told her everything, but in that way older siblings do, skipping some details to make it seem like she'd had complete control of the situation. Mom just kept shaking her head, muttering about sick people and the world these days, but I noticed how she double-checked the locks before bed. That Saturday, Mom made a new rule: no leaving the house without an adult unless it was to ride our bikes on our street. At 11, that rule felt like being grounded for life. I kept arguing that it was just one time, just bad luck. But deep down, I knew it wasn't bad luck. Those people had been out there, looking for someone like me, and I'd made it easy for them. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about the dog. The bright blue bandana, the way it wagged its tail. Was it even hers? Had they borrowed it from somewhere to make their act seem more believable? The thought made my stomach knot. One afternoon, I asked Lila what she thought would have happened if that man had gotten me into the van. She didn't answer right away. She just pushed her spoon around her bowl and said, "You don't want to know." Her voice was so certain, so flat, that it scared me more than any what if my own brain had come up with. I noticed little changes in her after that day. She walked me to school without complaining. She'd stand at the curb until I went inside. If we went anywhere public, she kept me in arm's reach. She still teased me, but it was softer now, like she was holding back. It was almost 2 weeks later when the police called the house again. Mom answered, and I sat at the table pretending to do a crossword puzzle. She didn't say much, just uh-huh and okay and thank you for letting us know. After she hung up, she told us they thought they'd spotted the same van in another county. Still no arrests. The not knowing was the worst part. Every time I saw an old white van on the road, my chest tightened. Every time a stranger smiled at me in a store, I wondered if it was the start of something bad. By August, the summer heat had baked the grass to a brittle yellow and the cicadas were even louder than before. Life had mostly gone back to normal. Or at least, everyone else's had. I was still carrying that day around like a secret weight. The thing about fear is it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits with you, quiet and patient, waiting for you to notice it again. Mine showed up in small ways. I didn't like walking past alleys anymore. I avoided the side of any building. I'd cross the street if someone I didn't know was coming toward me. One afternoon, I was in the grocery store with Mom when a man brushed past me in the freezer aisle. His hand accidentally bumped mine, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. My knees went weak, my heart hammering like it had that day outside the 7-Eleven. Mom noticed. She touched my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I just nodded, embarrassed. But she kept her hand there until we got to the checkout. Lila didn't talk about that day anymore, but I could tell she hadn't forgotten either. One night, we were sitting on the back steps, listening to the crickets, when she said out of nowhere, "You know, I almost didn't go with you that day." I looked at her, waiting. "I was going to tell you to walk there by yourself," she said, her voice low. Me say yes. I don't know why. I just did. But something made. We sat there a while longer, the air cooling around us. I thought about all the tiny decisions that had lined up to keep me safe that day. Lila's choice to come. The guy at the gas pump looking up at the right time. The fact that the 7-Eleven clerk had seen enough to call the cops. That's the part that still chills me. How close it all was. How if just one thing had gone differently, I might not have been sitting there on the back steps, listening to the crickets with the person who'd saved me. School started again in September, but something in me had shifted. Walking through the crowded hallways didn't feel the same. I was more aware of every face I didn't recognize, every car that lingered at the curb too long. Mom must have noticed because she signed me up for an after-school program at the community center. She said it was to give me something to do, but I knew it was so she didn't have to worry about me walking home alone. I didn't mind. The building was all bright murals and basketball echoes, and there was always an adult within arm's reach. Still, sometimes on the walk from the bus stop to our house, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder. It wasn't paranoia exactly. It was something quieter. Awareness. One chilly afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when I saw Lila across the street, standing with her friends. A white van rolled slowly past them. My chest tightened. It wasn't the same van. This one had a ladder on top and a company logo on the side. But that didn't matter. I got up, walked to the door, and stood there until the van turned the corner. Lila noticed. She raised an eyebrow at me across the street. A silent, "What?" I shook my head, but I think she understood. That night I asked her if she ever thought about what happened. She shrugged like she didn't want to give it weight. But then she said, "Yeah, sometimes. It makes me mad more than scared, though." "Why mad?" I asked. "Because they thought you were just easy, like you wouldn't notice, like no one would care." I thought about that for a long time after she went to bed, about how, in the moment, I hadn't noticed, how I'd just followed, and how it had almost cost me everything. Years later, when I started driving, I went back to that same 7-Eleven one July, right around the time they were doing the free Slurpee thing again. The automatic doors still made that same whoosh, and the same sugary chill wrapped around me. But I couldn't look at the snack aisle without seeing the small woman crouched there, the little white dog with the blue bandana. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to pour a cherry Slurpee and walk out, the cup sweating in my hand. On the drive home, I thought about how moments like that stay with you, not because you want them to, but because they shape how you see the world. I thought about how quickly something ordinary can tilt into something dangerous, how thin the line is between a summer memory and a nightmare. And I thought about Lila, charging around that corner without hesitation. About the stranger at the gas pump who decided it was his business. About the 7-Eleven clerk who didn't wait to see if things would work themselves out. It's easy to think bad things only happen far away, to other people. But the truth is, they happen right here. On streets you've walked 100 times, in places that feel safe until they aren't. Trust that feeling in your gut when something's wrong, even if you can't explain why. To remember that while danger can be quiet, so can courage. The kind that comes from making one small right decision in the moment it matters most. Because sometimes, that's the difference between going home with a Slurpee and not going home at all. Some nights the world just feels quieter. Not peaceful exactly. Just still, like everyone else has gone home early and forgotten to tell you. That was how it felt on March 28, 2022, as I left my gym on the east side of Spokane. The late winter cold had that knife-edge bite to it, the kind that slips through your jacket zipper if you don't pull it up all the way. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a row of dim yellow lights reflected in patches of lingering snow along the curb. I'd stayed later than usual, pushing myself on the treadmill because I'd been avoiding some other parts of my life, namely, the fact that I owed my mom $120. She'd covered my car insurance the month before, and I'd finally withdrawn the cash earlier that afternoon to pay her back. I didn't want to go home without snacks, though, so I decided to swing by the 7-Eleven on East Sprague before calling it a night. East Sprague has a strange personality at night. By day, it's just another strip of Spokane. Chain stores, gas stations, auto body shops. But after dark, the shadows seem thicker, and the people on the sidewalk seem less like they're heading somewhere and more like they're waiting for something. I'd been to that 7-Eleven plenty of times, but I never lingered in the parking lot after sundown. When I pulled in, the place looked calm. One car sat at a far-off pump, its driver scrolling on his phone, and a white delivery truck idled near the loading bay, its engine making a low, steady hum. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh, buzzing faintly, but there was comfort in their familiarity. The clerk was chatting with a man buying a six-pack, laughing at something he'd said. I grabbed a protein bar, a bottle of water, and made small talk with her as she rang me up. My wallet felt heavier with the folded bills for my mom, and I made a mental note to hand them over as soon as I got home. I stepped outside and into the cold again, the air smelling faintly of exhaust from the delivery truck. That's when I noticed her, leaning against the side of the building, just far enough away from the doors that she wasn't technically loitering, but close enough to make it clear she was waiting for someone. She was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled tight around her face. Her posture changed when she saw me. Her shoulders straightened and she started walking toward me. "Hey, excuse me," she called out. "Me out, and I've got nowhere to go tonight. Do you think you could give me a ride?" My boyfriend kicked. Her voice was calm, almost too calm for what she was saying. It didn't have the tremble you'd expect from someone stranded on a cold March night. Her eyes weren't pleading either. They were sharp, scanning my face, my hands, maybe even my pockets. I kept my steps steady toward my car, forcing a polite tone. "Sorry, I can't. I'm headed the other way." She took a step closer, her sneakers making almost no sound on the pavement. "Just a few miles. I don't have anyone else. You look like a good person." Come on. It's that stopped me. Not because I was flattered, but because something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. Not the tone of a stranger grateful for kindness, but the tone of someone fishing for a reaction. The compliment wasn't for me. It was bait. I shifted my keys in my hand so the car fob was between my fingers. My driver's side door was just a few feet away now. "Seriously, I'm sorry. I can't." Her lips pressed into a thin, cold line. She took another step forward, close enough that I could smell the faint tang of cigarette smoke on her hoodie. Then her hand landed on my car door handle. "Just let me sit in the back. I'm not going to hurt you." The word sent a jolt through me. On the table. "I'm not going to hurt you." No one says that unless it's already "step back," I said. My voice lower now, firmer. She didn't move. It was then that the low rumble of the delivery truck behind the store cut off abruptly. Silence swallowed the air for a moment, and my eyes flicked over her shoulder. That's when I saw him. A man stepping out from the shadowed space by the loading bay. Hoodie, hands in pockets, watching us. Something inside me went from caution to pure survival in an instant. I slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and hit the lock button. She didn't flinch when the locks clicked. Instead, she tapped twice on my window, hard, knuckles sharp against the glass. The sound jolted through me, too loud in the still air. "You don't have to be scared," she said, voice muffled but clear enough. The problem was I was scared, in a way that made every heartbeat feel like a countdown. I turned the key and my engine roared to life. The headlights washed over her face, making her eyes glint just enough for me to see that there wasn't fear or desperation in them. There was calculation. I shifted into reverse, my gaze darting to the mirrors. The man by the loading bay was still there, but now he'd moved a little closer, his shape darker against the brick wall. His hood shadowed his face, but his body language told me plenty. Hands still in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, watching without moving. As I eased backward, the woman stepped to the side of my car, staying just in my peripheral vision. I didn't want to back into something, but I also didn't want to take my eyes off her for more than a second. That's when she turned away from me and glanced toward the man. It wasn't a nervous look. It was the look of someone checking in, as if to say, "Not yet." Something cold unspooled in my chest. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a setup. I cranked the wheel, pulling out of the parking space faster than I usually would. The woman didn't follow, but she didn't step back either. She just watched, and so did the man, their faces turning together as I swung onto Sprague Avenue. For a moment I thought I saw them both take a step toward the sidewalk, like they were still deciding whether to follow. Then they stopped. I didn't slow down until I was 3 blocks away, where a gas station's fluorescent lights glared like a beacon. I pulled in and parked right under one of the floodlights, the kind that made the asphalt look pale and washed out. My hands shook as I fished my phone out of my bag. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost too calm, as I explained what had happened. The woman, the way she blocked my door, the man stepping out of the shadows. "We've had a few calls about a woman matching that description," the dispatcher said after a pause. "Usually not alone." That usually sat heavy in my mind. She asked for my location, then told me an officer could meet me to take a statement. I gave them the details, down to the color of the woman's hoodie and the direction the man had been facing. When I mentioned the delivery truck, the dispatcher made a note, but didn't say much else. A few minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. The officer was middle-aged, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made me think he'd had similar conversations too many times. He wrote everything down, asked the usual questions, but I could tell before he spoke that there wasn't much they could actually do. "No crime to charge," he said finally. "Part of town. But you did the right thing. Trust your gut, especially in that." I nodded, though my gut still felt like it was twisting. I kept thinking about the way they'd both looked at me, not like they'd lost something, but like they'd almost had it. The officer left, and I sat there a while longer, letting the adrenaline drain out of me before heading home. The protein bar sat untouched in the passenger seat, and my wallet with the folded bills for my mom felt heavier than ever. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the neighborhood was quiet. Porch lights glowed against the early spring chill, and somewhere a dog barked, the sound carrying across backyards. My hands had finally stopped shaking, but the tension hadn't left my shoulders. Inside, I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and set my wallet on the counter. The $120 was still there, crisp bills folded neatly in the leather. My mom was in the living room, half watching a true crime show, the kind where grainy footage plays while a narrator explains how someone vanished in an ordinary moment. "You okay?" she asked without looking away from the screen. "Yeah," I said. though my voice sounded thinner than I meant it to. 7-Eleven. Just a weird thing as she muted the TV, turned to me. Weird how? I gave her the short version. Woman asking for a ride, man waiting in the shadows, the feeling in my gut that something was off. She didn't say, "I told you so," though she could have. Instead, she just shook her head slowly, her lips pressed tight. "That's how it happens," she said. We didn't talk much more after that, but the look on her face stuck with me. Not surprise, just recognition. Like she knew the pattern. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every detail. The way the woman stepped closer instead of backing off. The exact moment the man moved into the light. The way her eyes flicked toward him before anything else happened. It was all so fast, and yet when I thought back, every second felt stretched, deliberate. And the part that unsettled me most wasn't what they did. It was what they almost did. Because it reminded me that danger doesn't always rush at you. Sometimes it stands still watching, waiting for you to take one wrong step closer. In the weeks after, I found myself changing little things without even deciding to. I parked closer to entrances. I kept my keys in my hand when walking at night. I didn't let strangers close the space between us unless I understood why they were there. And most of all, I learned to pay attention to the quiet moments. The ones that don't seem dangerous, until they do. Even now, months later, I drive past that 7-Eleven and glance at the loading bay. Sometimes it's empty, sometimes a truck idles there, but every time, I feel the same knot in my stomach. I think about how quickly I could have lost more than a few dollars or a car. I think about how I almost learned the hard way that not every plea for help is honest. And I remember her voice, soft but steady. "You look like a good person. I've decided I'd rather be a careful one. Trust is valuable, but it should never come before your safety. People with bad intentions often hide behind urgency, politeness, or sympathy. But your instincts exist for a reason. Listen to them even if it means disappointing someone. The ones worth helping will understand." I've always been a night person, not by choice, but because life made me one. Back in 2004, I worked at a paper supply warehouse on the industrial edge of Las Vegas. It wasn't glamorous, 8 to 12 hours a shift, surrounded by pallets of paper reams and rolls of packing tape, breathing in that dry, dusty smell of cardboard mixed with faint chemical ink. It paid the bills, and in my mid-30s, I was more interested in keeping the lights on than chasing excitement. October had settled in with cooler evenings, though in Vegas, cooler meant the difference between sweating through your shirt at 10 p.m. or not. My shifts were long, the pay just decent, and the hours, brutal. That night I'd pulled a double. I remember feeling the way only overtime exhaustion can make you feel, like your bones themselves are humming with fatigue. My forearms still ached from moving boxes, and my hands smelled faintly of the ink from freshly printed supply invoices. It was 1:27 in the morning when I left the warehouse. My apartment was a good 20-minute drive, and I knew I'd be fighting heavy eyelids all the way home. That's why I swung into the 7-Eleven on West Sahara Avenue, a habit on nights like this. Coffee, maybe a snack, just enough to keep me awake until I could collapse into bed. The parking lot was nearly empty, lit in patches by the humming street lamps that cast everything in a sickly orange glow. That's when I saw her. She was standing near the edge of the lot, just outside the brighter circle of light from one of the poles. Medium height, early to mid-30s, wearing a red hoodie pulled up over her head. Her arms were wrapped tight around herself like she was cold, though the air was barely cool enough to warrant it. I stepped out of my car and locked it, more out of habit than suspicion. But before I could take 3 steps toward the store, her voice called out, "Excuse me, can you help me?" It wasn't loud, but it carried. The kind of voice that's soft enough to sound vulnerable, yet just loud enough to make sure you hear it. I turned toward her. She told me she'd gotten into a fight with her boyfriend, that he'd taken her purse and thrown her out of the car. No phone, no money, and she just needed a ride home. I hesitated. I'd been raised to help people, and there was something in her tone that triggered that instinct. But there was also the way her eyes kept flicking, not toward me, but toward the far corner of the lot, the part shrouded in shadow where the streetlight was dead. Something about that unsettled me, though I couldn't put my finger on it. I told her I'd be right back and stepped into the store. Inside, the hum of the coolers and the smell of burnt coffee felt like a small reprieve from the tension outside. The store was empty except for one man in a denim jacket pretending to browse the magazine rack. His eyes weren't on the pages. They were on me, reflected faintly in the security mirror above the counter. The clerk was a tired-looking guy in a faded baseball cap. He barely glanced up when I poured myself a coffee, but as I walked toward the counter, he asked, "You the one helping the lady outside?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, and instantly his eyes sharpened in a way that told me he knew more than he was saying. "Be careful," was all he muttered before ringing me up. I left with my coffee, the unease from before now sitting heavier in my stomach. When I stepped back into the lot, the woman had moved, closer to my car. "Please," she said again. "It's just a few minutes down the road." I should have said no. I should have walked past her, gotten in my car and driven away. Instead, against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door. She slid in quickly, like she'd been waiting for the invitation. We pulled out of the lot, and for the first 5 minutes she was silent, staring out the window. Then, without turning to me, she asked, "You got any cash?" I shook my head. "No." She laughed, not kindly. "Don't lie. I saw your wallet in your back pocket." That's when my stomach dropped and the shadows I'd noticed earlier began knitting together into something clear and dangerous. Her voice changed after that laugh, less like a stranger making conversation and more like someone probing for weakness. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. The dark streets of West Sahara slid past in the headlights, the pools of neon from shuttered shops giving way to empty intersections. I kept my tone flat. "Look, I'm just giving you a ride, that's it." She shifted in her seat, turning toward me now. "Relax, I'm just asking a question." But her eyes weren't curious. They were calculating, like she was measuring the space between us, the angle of my body, the distance to my pocket. That's when I caught movement in the rearview mirror. A dark SUV had turned onto the same road we were on, hanging back just far enough to keep a couple car lengths between us. I told myself it was coincidence. Vegas streets at night aren't empty, but every time I turned, the SUV turned too. My pulse was starting to thump in my ears. She must have seen me glance in the mirror because her smirk returned. "You're in control right now?" "You really think it wasn't a question?" It was a warning. We passed under another broken streetlight, and in that brief shadow, I thought about every late-night crime report I'd ever skimmed in the paper, about how so many victims probably told themselves they were just imagining the danger. I wasn't imagining it. The SUV edged closer, headlights brightening in my mirror. She noticed and leaned back casually like she was waiting for something. "What's the plan here?" I asked, my voice low. She shrugged. "You'll find out." That was it. The creeping unease I'd been nursing since the parking lot turned into sharp, immediate survival instinct. My box cutter, used for breaking down shipments at the warehouse, was in the side compartment of my door. I'd tossed it there at the end of my shift without thinking. Now I was glad I had. I slowed the car just enough to make it look like I was about to pull over. Her posture changed instantly, ready, like she was waiting for a signal. Instead of stopping, I jerked the wheel hard to the right, pulling into the parking lot of an all-night laundromat that was lit up like a stage under floodlights. There were 3 cars parked out front, people visible inside. The SUV hesitated at the corner, engine idling. I shifted into park, box cutter now in my hand. "Out, now." Her smirk flickered into something tighter. "What's your problem?" "My problem," I said, "is that I'm not stupid. Get out of my car." The SUV's headlights cut across the lot as it inched closer. Her eyes darted toward it, and that was all I needed to confirm. I leaned forward, voice steady but low. "If you don't get out, I will make you regret it." She opened the door without another word, slamming it harder than necessary before jogging toward the SUV. The second she climbed in, it peeled away. tires squealing against the asphalt. I sat there for a long minute, the hum of the laundromat lights buzzing in my ears. Before my hands stopped shaking enough to drive, I went straight back to the 7-Eleven. The clerk looked up when I came in. Then a weather report. "She get to you too?" he asked, like it was nothing more. "Yeah," I said. "Almost." He nodded, like it confirmed something he already knew. "You're not the first. Won't be the last." Driving home after that, the streets didn't feel the same. Every shadow felt longer. Every set of headlights in my mirror felt like it was following me. I kept replaying the moment she'd stepped toward my car in the 7-Eleven lot, the way she'd kept glancing toward the edge of the property like someone was waiting for her signal. It was so ordinary at first. Just a tired guy grabbing coffee, just a woman asking for help. And that's what shook me most. There'd been no dramatic movie moment, no obvious mask of malice. It had been casual, calculated, and quiet. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a while with the engine off, letting the silence settle. My house was dark, the world calm, but I felt like something had shifted in me. The next day, I stopped by the 7-Eleven again. It was daylight this time, but the memory of last night was still in my chest. The same clerk was there. When I told him exactly what happened, about the SUV, about the ride request, he sighed like he'd heard it all before. "They don't always hit the same spot twice in a row," he said. "But yeah, we've had people get grabbed or robbed after giving someone a lift. Sometimes it's not about the money. Sometimes it's worse." I asked if he ever called the police. He said he had a few times, but by the time officers showed up, the people were long gone. Leaving the store, I realized I'd started automatically scanning every corner of the lot, just like she had the night before. Not out of paranoia, but out of practice. That's the thing nobody tells you once you've been that close to danger. Even if you get away untouched, you don't ever walk the same way again. That night in Las Vegas in 2004 didn't end with headlines or arrests. There was no dramatic showdown. But I think that's exactly why it stuck with me. The real threats aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they stand under a flickering street lamp, smiling, patient, waiting for the moment you decide to be a good person without asking enough questions. Help where you can, but protect yourself first. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, because your safety is worth more than a stranger's approval. And remember, danger rarely announces itself. It waits quietly, just outside the light. Untouched, you don't ever walk the same way again. That night in Las Vegas in 2004 didn't end with headlines or arrests. There was no dramatic showdown. But I think that's exactly why it stuck with me. The real threats aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they stand under a flickering street lamp, smiling, patient, waiting for the moment you decide to be a good person without asking enough questions. Help where you can, but protect yourself first. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, because your safety is worth more than a stranger's approval. And remember, danger rarely announces itself. It waits quietly, just outside the light. Coral Gables in June has its own kind of heaviness. The heat doesn't just wrap around you. It seeps into your skin and makes you feel like you're carrying extra weight with every step. Nights aren't much better. The sun goes down, the sky turns a bruised purple, and the air just hangs there, thick and wet, daring you to move faster than a slow walk. I'd been working at that 7-Eleven for just over a year, and if there was one thing I'd learned about summer shifts, it was that they dragged. By 9:42 p.m., the streets were mostly quiet. The college crowd hadn't started their late-night runs yet, and most locals were at home hiding from the humidity. Inside, the cool hum of the air conditioner mixed with the steady buzz of the freezer units. I was in the back, stacking pre-wrapped sandwiches inside the walk-in cooler, my hands going numb from the cold. It was the kind of repetitive work that lets your mind wander. Half the time I'd be thinking about nothing at all until that little ding of the door chime pulled me back to reality. That's when I first saw her. She stepped inside like she belonged there, like she'd been to this exact store 100 times before. Neat silver hair, faded blue dress that hung a little loose at the shoulders, eyes that seemed focused but not quite on me. She asked in a soft voice if we had strawberry shakes. It wasn't the question that stuck with me. It was how she said it, like she'd practiced it, like the words were a script and I was just another person she was delivering them to. I offered to grab one for her from the cooler, but she waved me off with a little smile and said she liked to look for herself. There was nothing particularly strange about it, at least not enough for me to get suspicious. But it did make me watch her just a little longer than I normally would a customer. She drifted toward the dairy case and I went back to the counter. A couple minutes later, the door chimed again. This time it was him. Tall, wiry, wearing a filthy white t-shirt with a streak of grease down the front, his hair matted like he'd been sleeping rough for weeks. He walked in slow but with purpose, like he already knew where he wanted to stand. He stopped in front of the counter and stared at the hot food menu above my head. "You got chicken?" His voice was low and slurred. Then he chuckled to himself like he'd just told an inside joke. I pointed toward the hot case. He didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the counter, eyes locked on mine. "You work here every night?" It was the kind of question I'd learned not to answer too honestly. I gave a vague "sometimes" and took a half step back. That was when the first beat of unease slid down my spine. The old woman eventually came back toward the counter, a small strawberry milk carton in her hands. She moved slowly, almost delicately, like she was careful not to spill an invisible drink. She didn't set it down right away, just stood there, watching the man with a quiet, measured stare. "Bathroom?" she asked, without looking at me. I nodded toward the far corner and handed her the key on its long plastic tag. She shuffled away, her blue dress swaying slightly with each step. The man was still leaning on the counter. "You're pretty quiet," he said. "You shy or just not a talker?" I forced a polite smile and told him I was just busy, my hands fidgeting with the receipt tape even though there were no customers waiting. When she came back, something in the air shifted. She didn't pay right away. She just stood there, milk carton in one hand, bathroom key in the other, her eyes flicking between me and the man. Then she tilted her head slightly and asked, in a tone that almost felt maternal, "You okay, sweetheart?" I hesitated. "I'm fine." She turned to him. "Why don't you leave her alone?" His smirk deepened, but there was a sharpness in it now. "Lady, I'm just talking." Her posture didn't change. Some kinds of talking aren't welcome. He took a slow step forward, squaring his shoulders like he was ready to make a point the hard way. "You should mind your own business." The tension in that moment was thick enough to slice. I was already glancing toward the phone under the counter, my fingers itching to grab it. I didn't know yet that in less than a minute this quiet, silver-haired woman would move faster than anyone I'd ever seen in my life. The man's eyes flicked between us, sizing up the situation. He wasn't in a hurry. That was the first thing I noticed. People who mean trouble don't always rush. Sometimes they draw it out, see how far they can push. The old woman didn't flinch. She slid the bathroom key onto the counter without breaking eye contact with him. That same soft, almost grandmotherly tone carried her next words. "I asked you nicely." He laughed. "You think you scare me?" It happened in a blink. He lunged, shoving her hard against the counter. The glass display rattled with the impact. I froze, my hands hovering above the phone. Before I could even think to dial, she moved. Her right hand disappeared into her dress pocket, and when it came back out, there was a small folding knife in it, blade already locked, pressed to his ribs. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "You picked the wrong granny, boy." The man stiffened, eyes widening just enough for me to catch the shift from aggression to uncertainty. He didn't back away right away, but his hands dropped from her shoulders. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt something colder. The realization that her grip on that knife wasn't clumsy or defensive. It was practiced. She kept him there, motionless, while she glanced over her shoulder at me. "Might want to call the police now." "Sweetheart, I dialed." My voice didn't sound like mine when I told the dispatcher what was happening. While I spoke, she kept him pinned in place, the knife just barely pressing into his shirt. He didn't speak now, just stared at her like he was trying to figure out what exactly she was. "Why are you even in here?" she asked him, her tone almost conversational. He didn't answer. "I'll tell you why," she continued. "You saw a young girl working alone at night and thought you'd make yourself comfortable. Thought you'd see what you could get away with." I was still on the line with dispatch when she smiled, not at me, not at him, but like she was smiling at a memory. "Men like you always think they're the predator." Blue and red lights flared outside before the sirens even reached us. The man glanced toward the glass door like he was weighing whether to run. She didn't give him the chance. With surprising strength, she hooked her free arm around his and half-turned him toward the entrance, keeping the knife pressed just enough to make it clear the situation wasn't negotiable. 2 officers came through the door fast. They told her to drop the knife. She didn't right away. Only after one officer stepped close did she finally lower it and set it on the counter. That's when I saw it, the quick flash of disappointment in her eyes. The man was cuffed first. I expected them to walk him out and leave her there, maybe give her a pat on the back. But the second set of cuffs came out for her. My confusion must have been written all over my face because one of the officers leaned in as they were walking her past me. "That's Margaret Hensley. We've been looking for her for years. Calls herself the Granny Killer." The name made my stomach twist. They led her to the cruiser, but before she ducked into the back seat, she looked over her shoulder at me and smiled warmly like we'd just shared a nice chat instead of a violent standoff. "You make a good shake, dear," she said, and then she was gone. Later, I'd learned bits and pieces about her, how she'd been tied to a string of attacks stretching back over a decade, how she'd been seen in different cities but never caught long enough to stick a case. And that knife? Police said it wasn't for protection. It was her trademark. I never saw the man again, though I heard he faced charges for assault. But for weeks, the thing that kept me awake wasn't him, it was her. The way she looked at me in those first few moments, the way she seemed to measure the room, to measure me. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe she hadn't been there to help at all. Maybe she was just looking for her next opportunity and he'd simply gotten in the way. Now, when people ask why I never work the late shift anymore, I just tell them I've had my fill of excitement. What I don't say is that every time the door chime rings, I still half expect to see a neat silver head in a faded blue dress. Because danger doesn't always come stomping in with a snarl. Sometimes it smiles, asks for a strawberry shake, and leaves you wondering for the rest of your life what it really wanted. Evil doesn't always look like a threat when it walks in the door. Sometimes it looks like someone's grandmother. Trust your instincts, even when the danger comes wrapped in a smile. I grew up in a quiet river town in southern Illinois, the kind of place where everyone knew your last name. And the most exciting thing to happen in a month was the county fair or the annual library book sale. I was used to wide streets, long stretches of farmland, and the same faces every day. Crime was something that happened in cities you saw on the evening news. When I moved to Champaign for college, the shift felt like stepping into another world. More noise, more faces, more shadows in the corners you didn't expect. I lived in a worn brick dorm on the edge of campus, sandwiched between a laundromat and a row of takeout joints. My schedule was a balancing act. Part-time classes, tutoring sessions for extra cash, and a few hours at the library in the evenings. Meals were a mix of cereal, microwave noodles, and whatever was easy to grab between obligations. That's how the 7-Eleven became part of my routine. It was only 3 blocks away, always open, and reliably stocked with the one thing that made a bad week feel better: a pint of Ben Jerry's fish food. By February, I'd been in the city just 3 months. Winter had settled hard over the sidewalks, laying down dirty slush that clung to the cuffs of my jeans and left my fingers aching by the time I reached my door. That Friday afternoon, I left campus hungry, tired, and too cold to think about cooking. I decided to walk over to the 7-Eleven before heading back to the dorm. The air stung my cheeks, and I remember thinking the store's orange and green sign looked like a beacon in the gray. Inside, the heater was on full blast. My glasses fogged instantly, giving me a brief moment of blindness before the rows of fluorescent-lit aisles came into focus. The clerk, a guy about my age, leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. The place was quieter than usual for a Friday. No students grabbing coffee, no couples arguing over chips. Just me, the clerk, and one other customer. A man standing at the far end of the frozen section. He was big, broad shoulders under a heavy black parka, a knit beanie pulled low over his forehead. I thought maybe he was just another shopper killing time until he spoke. "Nice hair," he said. His tone wasn't friendly. It was too slow, too deliberate. My strawberry blonde hair had drawn comments before, but this one didn't land right. I managed a polite, "Thanks," and focused on the freezer door in front of me, pretending to search for the right ice cream. When I closed the door, he had moved closer. "Bet it's soft, huh?" he said, almost whispering now. I gripped the pint of ice cream tighter and took a step toward the counter. I'd barely moved when I felt a sudden, sharp tug at the back of my head. My scalp burned. "Don't walk away when I'm talking to you," he said. His voice was low, just under the hum of the refrigerators. My stomach flipped. The clerk hadn't noticed yet, still looking at his phone. I twisted, trying to free my hair from his grip, but his hand tightened. Then the clerk finally looked up. His eyes widened and his phone hit the counter. "Hey, get your hands off her," he shouted. The man smirked like this was all a joke. Then, with a shove, he released me. My knees wobbled. The clerk vaulted over the counter and stepped between us. "You need to leave. Now." The man didn't argue. He just looked at me for one long moment, his gaze slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing my face. Then he turned and walked out. The clerk locked the door behind him. "Guy's been hanging around all week," he muttered. I left shaking, my scalp still sore. I told the morning shift to keep an eye out. Back in my dorm, I tossed my backpack on the bed and sat down, trying to slow my breathing. That's when I noticed my wallet wasn't in the front pocket where I always kept it. I called the store. Nothing. I convinced myself it had fallen out somewhere and tried to forget. 3 nights later, my RA knocked on my door. "This was slid under your door," she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was my wallet, and a folded piece of notebook paper with 4 words written in blocky handwriting. "Your hair is softer." I didn't sleep much that night. The envelope sat on my desk like it was breathing, the folded note still inside. I told myself over and over it was just some creepy prank. Maybe he found my wallet outside. Maybe the note was his sick idea of being funny. But the fact that it showed up at my door, 3 stories up, past a locked entryway, meant someone had been inside my building. Someone who knew exactly where I lived. The next morning, I went straight to the campus police. The officer behind the desk listened politely while I explained what had happened at the 7-Eleven and showed her the note. She wrote everything down, asked if I could describe the man in detail, and nodded in a way that told me she'd heard stories like this before. "We'll keep an eye on it," she said, sliding the note into a plastic evidence sleeve. "If you see him again, call us immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." Walking out of the station, I felt a flicker of relief until I realized nothing had actually changed. They didn't know who he was. He could be anywhere. He could be watching right now. The next week, I avoided the 7-Eleven entirely. I walked different routes to class, kept my head down, and made sure my dorm door was locked at all times. It felt paranoid, but I couldn't shake the image of him standing in that aisle, gripping my hair like it was his property. My friends noticed I was quieter, more distracted. I blamed it on midterms. By Thursday night, I thought maybe the whole thing was fading. I'd gone nearly a week without seeing him. No new notes, no strange knocks on my door. That illusion shattered at 9:17 p.m. I was sitting on my bed scrolling through an online quiz for class when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but habit won out. "Hello?" A pause, just long enough for my chest to tighten. Then, I liked it better down. I froze. The voice was unmistakable, slow, deliberate, the same tone that had slithered into my ear at the 7-Eleven. I hung up without a word and immediately called campus police. By the time an officer arrived, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely explain what happened. She took down the number and told me not to answer unknown calls. "We'll trace it if we can," she promised. But she didn't sound convinced. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak in the hallway, every door slammed down the corridor made me flinch. At one point, I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, pepper spray in my hand, just staring at the door. 2 days later, I made the mistake of thinking daylight meant safety. It was Saturday afternoon, sunny for once, and I decided to walk to the library to catch up on assignments. The sidewalks were wet from melting snow, and people were out in clusters heading to coffee shops or just enjoying the weather. It felt normal, until I saw him. He was across the street, leaning against the brick wall of a closed thrift store, wearing the same black parka and beanie. His head was tilted slightly like he was studying me from a distance. My stomach dropped. I ducked into a cafe on the corner, my pulse in my ears. From the window, I could see him still standing there, unmoving. I pulled out my phone and called campus police again, giving them my location and describing him. They said an officer was nearby and would check it out. I stayed in the cafe, pretending to scroll on my laptop, but my eyes never left the street. When a patrol car finally pulled up, he was gone. The officer came inside, calm, but clearly irritated at how quickly the lead had slipped away. "If you see him again, try to get a photo," he said. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, like I'd have the presence of mind to take a picture while being stalked. I walked home with that note replaying in my head. "Your hair is softer." And for the first time, I realized it wasn't just creepy, it was a claim. A claim that might not end with a note. The next few days blurred together in a haze of unease. I went to class, worked my library shifts, and kept my social life to a bare minimum. I was constantly scanning my surroundings, checking reflections in windows, glancing over my shoulder on the street. It wasn't just about him showing up anymore. It was about the possibility of him being there without me noticing. By Wednesday, I was running on caffeine and nerves. That evening, I stayed late at the library, shelving books in the quiet back section. My shift ended at 9 p.m., and by the time I walked out into the cold, the campus paths were nearly empty. I tightened my scarf and headed toward the dorms, the sound of my boots crunching on patches of ice the only thing breaking the silence. Halfway there, I noticed it, a shadow moving in sync with mine, a few steps behind. I sped up. So did the shadow. I turned onto a side path, hoping to throw whoever it was off, and risked a glance back. It was him. The black parka, the beanie, the same way he tilted his head like he was studying me. I didn't think, I just ran. My breath came in bursts, the cold tearing at my lungs. I cut through a courtyard past the dorm laundry building and headed for the main entrance of my building. I swiped my key card and shoved through the door, slamming it shut behind me. When I looked through the small glass pane, he was standing just outside, hands in his pockets, not even pretending to hide. He stared at me for what felt like forever, then slowly lifted one hand and touched his beanie in a mock salute before walking away. That night, I emailed my RA, the housing office, and campus security in one go. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted it documented that this man had followed me twice now, contacted me, and gotten inside my building once. The housing office responded the next morning, saying they'd alerted staff and increased patrols, but I could tell they didn't have a plan for what to actually do. 2 nights later, the situation boiled over. It was just after midnight. My roommate was gone for the weekend and the dorm was quiet. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint knock at the door. 3 taps. I froze, holding my breath. Another 3 taps, louder this time. I eased out of bed, heart pounding, and crept toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw nothing at first, just the dimly lit hallway. Then suddenly his face filled the glass. He was smiling. I stumbled back, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. My voice was shaking as I explained the situation. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, lock my door, and keep talking until officers arrived. From the other side of the door, his voice came low and almost playful. "Told you I liked it better down." My skin crawled. I could hear him dragging something lightly against the door, a slow, scraping sound. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, 2 campus officers and a city police car arrived. They caught him still in the hallway. The officers spoke to him out of my sight, but I caught snippets. Something about trespassing, about prior warnings. One of the campus cops later told me they'd been trying to identify him for weeks. He wasn't a student. He was a local man with a history of harassment charges. They issued a trespass order, meaning he could be arrested if he set foot on campus again. It wasn't the dramatic end I'd imagined. No courtroom, no clear justice. Just a piece of paper saying he wasn't allowed near me. But it was something. In the days that followed, I started letting my guard down, little by little. I went back to the 7-Eleven once during the day with a friend. I even wore my hair down again. But I never stopped locking my door the second I stepped inside. Looking back, what unsettles me most isn't the physical encounters. It's how quickly someone can fixate on you. How small moments can escalate into something dangerous before you even realize it's happening. Trust your instincts. The first time someone's attention makes you feel uneasy, listen to that feeling. Put distance between yourself and them. Tell someone. Make a record. Because sometimes danger doesn't announce itself. It just waits, watching until the moment it decides to step closer. And when it does, you'll wish you'd acted the first time you felt it breathing down your neck. I'd been living in Portland for just under a year, long enough for the city's quirks to start feeling normal, but not long enough for the rain to stop getting under my skin. People from here like to say the drizzle's no big deal, but this wasn't drizzle. It was November, and the weather was the kind that turned streets into streams and left a chill in your bones long after you got inside. My old Honda Civic had seen better days. The heater barely worked, and every time I drove through a deep puddle I could feel the whole frame shudder. That night I was waiting for my friend Ryan to pick me up. His car had broken down across town, and the tow truck driver told him to meet at a repair shop a few blocks from me. Ryan didn't like dealing with mechanics alone. He had this idea they could smell uncertainty, so I offered to tag along. We were supposed to meet there at 11, but I was early and the rain was relentless, so I pulled into the parking lot of a 7-Eleven on Killingsworth to wait. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute, watching water race down the windshield in chaotic patterns. My wipers squeaked against the glass, adding to the tired hum of the engine. After a while, I decided I couldn't take another 15 minutes in the cold car. I grabbed my wallet, shoved my hood up, and made a dash for the store. Inside, the warmth hit me hard, and my glasses fogged up. The place was nearly empty except for a woman behind the counter. She was maybe late 40s, with stringy black hair pulled into a tight ponytail. The uniform shirt she wore strained a little at the shoulders, and her name tag was flipped backward so I couldn't read it. "Cold night to be out," she said as I made my way to the coffee station. Her voice was even, almost friendly, but her eyes stayed on me in a way that felt deliberate. "Yeah," I said, busying myself with pouring coffee, waiting on a friend. Her smile didn't fade. "That could help fix your friend's car. We got a basement here, tools and stuff down there. Might be something that gave me pause." "Thanks, but I think he's got it covered." She just shrugged, but her gaze lingered as I walked to the counter. I paid, noticing how she kept glancing at the front window like she was expecting someone. The rain had turned the glass into a shimmering sheet, the streetlights outside blurry halos. While I was sipping my coffee and scrolling my phone, Ryan called. His voice was muffled by static and the sound of rain hammering his end of the line. "Hey, you still at the store?" he asked. "Yeah, why?" That place? You're alone in there? I glanced around. Just me and the cashier. Why? He hesitated. Okay. Don't go anywhere with her. I've heard stuff about that store. Just stay in sight. Before I could ask what he meant, she was suddenly closer. I hadn't heard her move. You don't want to see the basement? Could be warmer than standing up here. You sure? I laughed politely. I'm good, thanks. Not many people come in this late, she said. Nice to have company for once. Her tone was casual, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach tighten. I took a step back, pretending to check my phone, but the bell above the door jingled before I could say anything else. A man in a raincoat walked in, water dripping from his sleeves. He didn't look at me. He looked at her, like they knew each other. The man in the raincoat moved with a kind of casual heaviness, like he had all the time in the world. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and when he pulled his hood back, I could see the water dripping off the brim of a faded mariner's cap. He didn't say hello. He didn't even look around the store. His eyes went straight to her. Still leaning on the counter, she greeted him with a small nod. No smile, no words. Just that quiet acknowledgement you give to someone you see every day. He walked over to the gum rack by the register, picked up a pack without really looking at it, and set it down. Then, in a voice low enough that I had to strain to hear, he asked, "Still need help downstairs?" She tilted her head toward me, just barely. "Yeah," she said, almost under her breath. I felt it, my heartbeat climbing like I'd just sprinted a block. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, but the air in the store seemed heavier all of a sudden. I took a slow step toward the door, my coffee in one hand, my phone still open in the other. "I'm just gonna wait in my car," I said, forcing a small smile. Neither of them replied. Their eyes followed me as I pushed the door open. The rain hit me like a cold slap, but it was a relief compared to the atmosphere inside. I hurried to my car, climbed in, and locked the doors. From the safety of the driver's seat, I could still see them through the window. The man in the raincoat had leaned on the counter, speaking to her in low tones. Every so often, they both glanced toward my car. I gripped the steering wheel and kept the engine running. The rain pounded the roof, the wipers struggled to keep up, and the inside of the car felt suddenly too small. Every time headlights passed, I hoped it was Ryan, but the minutes dragged. At one point, the man stepped outside. He didn't come toward me, just stood under the overhang, watching the parking lot. His hands were deep in his coat pockets, and his face was unreadable in the glare from the streetlight. After a moment, he went back inside. I kept replaying Ryan's warning in my head. Don't go anywhere with her. That line felt heavier now, like it came from a place of actual knowledge, not just superstition. By the time Ryan finally pulled into the lot, my pulse was so high I barely noticed the cold anymore. I jumped out of my car and into his without a word. He glanced at the store as we pulled away, jaw tight. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's the one." I turned toward him. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, eyes fixed on the wet road ahead. "A couple of people went missing last winter. Both were last seen at that 7-Eleven. Neither case went anywhere. Cops couldn't pin anything on anyone, but..." He trailed off. "But you think..." "I don't think," he said, cutting me off. "I just know enough to stay the hell out of there." The words sat heavy between us as the store lights faded in the rearview mirror. For days after that night, I kept replaying the moment when she'd asked me to go downstairs. The way she said it, like it wasn't a question at all, but a kind of test. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that if I'd agreed, something would have happened that I wouldn't have walked away from. Ryan and I didn't talk much about it again. He didn't like to dwell on things he couldn't prove, and I didn't like the way my chest tightened when I thought about the man in the raincoat. But every time I passed that 7-Eleven on my way to work, I found myself scanning the parking lot for either of their faces. 1 week later, on my lunch break, I took a detour just to see the place again. Call it curiosity, call it something darker, but I needed to know if it still looked the same. The rain was lighter that day, more of a mist, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and exhaust. When I turned onto Killingsworth, I almost didn't recognize the building. The lights were off, and a handwritten sign taped to the glass read, "Temporarily closed for renovations." At first, that might have made sense. Businesses close for maintenance all the time. But then I saw the plywood. Someone had nailed thick boards over the narrow basement windows that ran along the side of the building. Not fresh, clean-cut lumber either. These boards were weathered, stained, like they'd been pulled from somewhere else in a hurry. I parked across the street and just sat there staring. The lot was empty. No cars, no pedestrians. The only sound was the occasional swish of tires on wet asphalt as a bus passed. And then I noticed something else. Small, dark smears near the bottom edge of the plywood. Could have been oil, could have been dirt, but something about the pattern made me think of handprints. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't take pictures. I just pulled away slowly, feeling that same creeping weight I'd felt inside the store. That night, I told myself to let it go. People disappear every day for reasons that have nothing to do with basements or strangers. I tried to believe it. But a month later, another rumor started making the rounds online. An anonymous post on a Portland message board claiming that an abandoned 7-Eleven in North Portland had been raided by police in the middle of the night. No official report, no arrests, just lights, sirens, and then nothing. I never confirmed it. Didn't try. Because deep down, I knew that even if the rumors were true, the people I'd seen that night were already long gone, and whatever had been in that basement, if anything, was something I was never meant to see. I still keep my distance from late-night convenience stores, especially the quiet ones with friendly employees who seem a little too eager to help. There's a fine line between kindness and danger, and sometimes you don't see it until you're standing right at the edge. Not every offer of help comes from a good place. Trust your instincts. If a situation feels wrong, it probably is. Curiosity might give you answers, but it can also take you exactly where someone wants you to go. And sometimes, the safest decision you'll ever make is the one to walk away. I've always believed the middle of nowhere feels different in the middle of the night. The air presses in tighter, the silence has more weight, and the smallest light in the distance can feel like it's calling you toward it, or warning you away. That August, the desert was a straight black ribbon ahead of us, lined by stars and the occasional hulking shadow of a cactus. We were 14 hours into the drive from Chicago to Los Angeles, our van carrying more than just people. 2 rescue dogs, Bella and Scout, slept in crates in the back. The trip wasn't just about delivering them to my friend Emma. It was about seeing her one last time before chemotherapy. It was the kind of trip you don't cancel, no matter how long the road looks. It was me in the passenger seat, Jenna beside me in the back, her boyfriend Luis sprawled against the window, and Jenna's brother Tyler at the wheel. Tyler was the only one still alert enough to drive at that hour. The rest of us ran on caffeine and stubbornness. I kept the map app open on my phone, rattling off bad trivia to keep him awake. "Did you know Ludlow has like 10 people living in it?" I said. He chuckled, rubbing his eyes. "Guess we're about to make it 14. The gas light came on near mile marker 178. We followed a faded roadside sign toward a 7-Eleven. The exit ramp dropped us into a place that felt stuck in time. There was a single row of buildings, most with peeling paint and hollow windows. The motel looked like it hadn't had guests in years, the neon letters sputtering just enough to spell "Hotel." The 7-Eleven sat under a flickering street lamp, the kind that buzzed in uneven bursts. The air smelled faintly metallic, like dust and rust had been fighting for decades. Tyler parked by the pumps and killed the engine. "Gas and coffee," he muttered. "Then we keep moving." I didn't know yet that the next 30 minutes would change how I felt about small towns forever. Inside, the place smelled faintly of bleach, but not the fresh, clean kind. More like it had been mopped hours ago and left to mingle with stale air. A tall, thin man in a green cap stood behind the counter, his eyes tracking us without a word. His stare wasn't hostile exactly, but it was sharp, deliberate. Jenna drifted toward a rack of chips, while I headed for the coffee machine. The thing sputtered like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration, but I filled a cup anyway. Tyler moved toward the counter to prepay for gas. That's when I noticed the other man. He was sitting alone at one of the plastic tables in the corner, the kind you only ever see in convenience stores. No food, no drink, just his hands flat on the tabletop, his gaze fixed toward the window. At first I thought he was looking out at the street, but when I caught the angle of his head, I realized he was watching the reflection of our group in the glass. Luis leaned close to me. "Why's he here at 2 in the morning?" he whispered. I shrugged like it was nothing, but my stomach tightened. When Tyler paid, the man at the table spoke for the first time. His voice was low, gravelly. "Storm's coming," he said. We all froze. Outside, the sky was clear, a desert bowl of stars. Jenna gave him a polite smile and headed for the door, and we followed. At the pump, something felt off immediately. The meter already read $8 before Tyler even started filling. He pointed it out to the clerk through the window. The man didn't move for a moment, then said, "Don't worry about it. Just fill it up." His tone wasn't friendly. It was final. While Tyler worked the pump, I took the dogs to a patch of dirt by the side of the store. That's when I saw them, fresh tire tracks leading around the back into darkness. Somewhere far off I thought I heard barking. Not playful barking, but short, harsh bursts. I tried to shake it off, but Luis appeared suddenly, his voice low. "We need to go. Now." "What happened?" I asked. He glanced toward the store. "That guy inside asked if we were headed west. Then he said, 'Careful. Not everyone you meet out here wants you to get there.' We loaded the dogs, slammed the doors, and locked them." Tyler finished pumping without another word. As we pulled out of the lot, I glanced back. The man at the table had stepped outside, standing under the flickering light. His hands were still at his sides, but his posture was straight, rigid, watching us go. The road out of Ludlow was empty. The town's glow faded fast, swallowed by black desert. We drove in silence for miles, each of us replaying the strange exchange in our heads. Then I saw headlights in the rear view, small at first, then growing. "They've been back there since we left," I said quietly. Tyler checked his mirrors. "We'll see if they turn off in Barstow." The headlights kept their distance but never disappeared. Barstow's lights felt like a city after an ocean of darkness. We took the first exit, pulling into a diner parking lot. The car behind us slowed at the ramp, then veered onto another road without stopping. We sat there for a moment, none of us talking. The desert outside the windshield seemed too big, too empty. Tyler finally said, "Guess the storm never came." But I wasn't sure. Maybe the storm had been something else entirely. We made it to Los Angeles the next day, and Emma hugged us like we'd crossed an ocean for her. But in my mind, I kept seeing the man in the corner, the tire tracks, the headlights. Some things stick because they scare you. Others stick because they remind you how quickly you can go from safe to not. Trust your instincts. The world doesn't always announce danger with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it's just a quiet voice in a gas station at 2 a.m., warning you to leave before the sky changes. I never planned to work at a 7-Eleven. It was supposed to be a stopgap, something to fill the time and pay the bills after I left my last job at the diner. But the hours were decent, the walk was short, and the quiet of the late-night shift was a kind of peace I didn't know I needed. Small-town nights have a rhythm, delivery trucks in the distance, the occasional group of teenagers grabbing snacks, and the steady hum of coolers in the back. I grew used to it. I lived in a one-bedroom above an old barber shop on Main Street, a place that smelled faintly of hair tonic even though the shop had been closed for years. The rent was cheap, and my landlord didn't bother me. Most evenings, I'd leave my apartment around 9:30, coffee in hand, and make the short walk to the store. The streets would be mostly empty, just a stray cat crossing under a street lamp or the faint rumble of a motorcycle in the distance. The store was small, 3 long aisles, a cooler section in the back, and the coffee station in the far right corner. From the counter, I could see almost everything. It made me feel like I was in control, like I could keep an eye on anyone who came in. Most nights were uneventful. People came and went, polite nods and small talk, sometimes a drunk regular with a story too long for the few items they were buying. That night started like any other. I'd mopped the tile near the soda machine, wiped down the counter, and was thinking about what I'd make for breakfast after closing. I remember the sound of the mop bucket wheels squeaking as I pushed it toward the back. That's when the chime over the door rang. He stepped in without hurry, without hesitation. Tall, maybe 6'2", with a long, dark raincoat that moved slightly as he walked. The odd thing was, it hadn't rained in weeks. His head stayed level, eyes never quite meeting mine. He walked past the counter, past the snacks, and straight toward the coffee station in the far corner. "Evening, sir," I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach him. "Some. Coffee's fresh if you want." He paused for half a second, turned his head slightly toward me, then looked away again. No nod, no smile, no words. He stopped near the shelves but didn't pick anything up. His hands stayed at his sides, his posture unnaturally still. From behind the counter I tried to keep working, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. He didn't move except for the occasional slow shift of his gaze toward the small convex security mirror above me. It felt like he was checking if I was watching. The silence in the store began to feel heavy. The hum of the fridge in the back seemed louder. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't quite explain. The chime rang again, breaking the tension. A young woman stepped inside, walked straight to the cooler, and grabbed a soda. She glanced toward the far corner, her brow furrowing. When she came to pay, she leaned toward me and whispered, "That guy's been standing there since I drove up. I thought he was a mannequin until he moved." I looked over her shoulder. Same posture, same stillness. I decided I had to say something. I walked toward him, keeping a safe distance. "Closing soon. If you need help, I can—" "Sir, we're—" He turned sharply, his eyes locking onto mine. Wide, pupils too large, no emotion in his face. His lips moved just enough to form the words, "Not yet." The sound was barely audible, but I heard it. Then he turned back toward the shelves like nothing had happened. I stepped back, keeping my voice steady as I told the woman her total. My hands were sweating as I picked up the landline and called my manager. I spoke low, explaining what was happening. She told me to lock the doors after the woman left and keep her on the line. I looked up from the phone and he was gone. No chime from the door, no movement on the cameras. Just gone. The woman lingered, and together we searched the store. The aisles were empty, the restroom unoccupied. In the far corner by the coffee station sat a half-empty cup of coffee. I hadn't seen him pour it, and I hadn't heard the machine. Near the cooler, faint shoe prints marked the floor, leading toward the back room. The door was locked, had been locked all night. We both stood there in silence, staring at it like it might open on its own. The woman left quickly after that. I locked the door and stayed on the phone with my manager until the shift was over. The store felt colder, like the air had shifted somehow. Every creak of the building made me turn my head. For weeks after, I avoided looking toward that far corner during my shifts. I'd catch myself glancing at the coffee station only to feel my stomach knot. The smell of coffee would hit me sometimes, faint and unexpected, even when the pots were empty and cleaned. I told myself it was just a strange customer, maybe someone passing through town. But in the quiet moments, I'd remember the way he stood, the way he watched without watching, and the way he said those words, "Not yet." Like something was coming. I never saw him again. But every night I worked alone, I felt the weight of that corner pressing in on me, the sense that the moment he'd been waiting for hadn't passed. It had just been delayed. Some nights, when the streets are empty and the hum of the fridge is the only sound, I wonder if I'll look up to see him there again, waiting. When your instincts tell you something's wrong, trust them. You don't always get a second chance to walk away before "not yet" becomes now. I never meant to end up at 4621 Rosewood Street, but life has a way of steering you to weird places when you're already worn thin. My name is Maya Bellamy. I'm 29, a single mom working evening shifts at the Family Dollar in Jackson, Mississippi. Struggling with housing, juggling childcare, trying to keep my sanity. I took that job because it was stable, even if it meant working mostly alone past closing. When I started in January, it felt routine. Shelf stocking, nightly close-ups, quiet evenings watching the store settle. But I noticed things from week one. The store seemed stuck in the past, not just peeling paint, but preserved like a time capsule. The back room behind aisle 7 hadn't been touched in decades. A locked red door marked, "No entry, hazardous materials." Angela, our manager, said not to worry. It was from before her time. Still, lights flickered above that door. Products fell in places with no wind. Once the motion camera in that aisle caught someone walking, but no one appeared in the store when I checked. I thought I was tired, stressed. Caleb, my 6-year-old son, had been through therapy after a minor seizure. My ex stopped paying support. Rent was stacking. Sleep was rare. One night, around 11:15 p.m. after closing, the backroom lights flickered violently above aisle 7. I counted registers in the front. Boxes toppled in the back. I radioed the guard. "Hey, you here yet? I heard something back there." He answered, voice calm. "No. You're alone until patrol shift starts. Everything's clear from our end." I later realized I hadn't expected him to say anything else. I checked the red door, slightly ajar. Cold air seeped out. I held my breath, heart pounding, but didn't open it. Then I heard it. A soft, drawn-out whisper. It froze me in place. I backed away, slammed that door shut, locked it in place with trembling hands. The next morning, Angela shrugged at me. Probably echoes from the HVAC. Or tired mom brain. I nodded, forcing normal. But the store didn't feel normal anymore. I didn't tell anybody else. I couldn't let it get around I was maybe losing it. But I started taking extra long breaks. Daytime hours I spent at my sister's house just to breathe. At work, I kept thinking I saw a small silhouette near aisle 7 out of the corner of my eye. When I turned, nothing. Then one evening, the fish tank behind the register shattered. Glass everywhere. Crickets still crawled. A mess. I cut my palm cleaning it. No alarm. Cameras showed nothing. No explanation. I felt heat at my neck, then pressure behind me. Then nothing. The tank exploded. Nobody asked how it happened. That same night, Devin, a temp stocking supplies, fell down a flight of stairs in the supply room. He screamed he felt a hand push him. He had broken his wrist. He swore his attacker vanished before he hit the bottom. I comforted him, but wondered if the same presence that whispered my name was growing bolder. My back cramped from leaning over bins. I could taste the salt in my veins. Fear felt sticky. I told Angela I might quit. She held up a hand. "It's a rundown building. Don't dig. Keep your head down. And don't think about that door." But I couldn't unthink it. I pulled my thin jacket tighter around me. Night shifts are long, store lighting harsh. I replayed the voice. Faint, childlike, sad. Then came the storm. That Friday derailed everything. Mid-shift, the lights flickered once, twice. Then went out. Emergency strips lit in red. The freezer section hummed. Rain hammered the roof. I was scanning expired goods in aisle 6 when I sensed breathing. Heavy, deliberate. I looked across aisle 7. The red door stood wide open. Outside it was a shadow figure, blurry edges, and beside it a small silhouette, a child's shape. I dropped my scanner. Ran. I slammed into the office door, locked it. Called 911, my voice cracked. "Someone's in the store, I'm locked in the office." They arrived quickly. I guided 2 officers inside. The store was dark, aisles quiet. I pointed them toward aisle 7. They found the red door open. Inside, nothing. No people, no box, no stairs. But on the grimy floor, they saw the crayon drawings smeared in dirt and dust. Little pictures of a boy behind a door. One message, "He never left." My knees gave out. I sobbed, the child's voice echoing. The tank, Devon, all of it bound together. Police searched thoroughly. Nothing. The door locked with a heavy latch internally broken. They dusted prints, only mine and theirs. I was trembling. They recommended I take time off, offered me witness status, but I knew staying there would break me. I went home at dawn, sun cutting through storm clouds. Caleb slept in messy sheets asking, "You okay, Mama?" I nodded, kissed his head. Sleep didn't come until morning birds cheeped. My dreams tumbled through red doors and whispering voices. I quit the next day. Angela asked why. I said simple, health reasons. Told her stress and family needed me. She nodded, no guilt on her face. I packed up, my name tag, my navy cardigan, quiet. I avoided door keys. Months later, I got a call from a reporter at the Clarion Ledger. She was investigating the building. Told me it had been a foster home in the 1980s. There was a fire during evacuation. Several child deaths. One 6-year-old boy disappeared and never found. They named him Caleb, the same as my son. I felt hollow. Reporters shared archived photos, children playing in dining hall, then charred ruins. The building replaced by Family Dollar. That red door matched old blueprints, a sealed hatch under back aisle. Toxic storage? Possibly where records went. I cried when the reporter sent me documents. I blocked the office number afterward. I couldn't handle it. I worked part-time at a cafe after, found a small apartment. Caleb laughed again. But at night, I sometimes still heard a whisper in my dreams. I imagined him a ghost, or a memory bleeding through. I avoided stores with locked red doors. Months passed. I moved. I kept Caleb safe. Yet closure eluded me. I wrote a letter to the local housing authority, urging them to check older properties repurposed from childcare. I questioned how a foster home fire could leave no public record. Then I realized I didn't need to know all the answers. I shared my story in group therapy. I told it simply, about the shaking tank, the push, the drawings. People listened. Some believed, some didn't. I didn't care. My voice had weight. I kept that letter I found the night before I quit. I burned it later, on a safe evening at my sister's porch. Burning didn't erase the memory, but it made room. I told Caleb stories at night, normal stories. He sleeps soundly. I sleep with one eye open. I learned that sometimes real horror isn't monsters under the bed. It's the ordinary world hiding a tragedy. A place you thought safe reveals its scars. You escape with your life, and knowing that a child may still be waiting, unfound, lost, changes you. At the end, here's what I believe. People carry scars from neglected histories. Places absorb pain. And sometimes we witness that pain without calling it by name. The red door was a doorway to a forgotten loss. The boy Caleb was never found, not in records, not in life. But he stayed. When pain is buried and forgotten, it can haunt the present. We all have a responsibility to remember, to listen when someone shares what happened, to look beneath old doors, and sometimes to believe the whispers when the world tells you to walk away.